This is Bill Nell speaking. Welcome to the truth about the Philadelphia experiment. You're about to experience an amazing story. It's a story that I've spent many years investigating. I like to call this part of the presentation the interview. It was filmed in 1989, but that doesn't make it any less relevant. In fact, it's become more relevant. A number of other witnesses have come forward since that time to verify the information that you'll see here. The interview comprises two stories that are intertwined: the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk Project. The Philadelphia experiment had several purposes. It began as a World War II Navy project to demagnetize ships against a new type of German mine that was attracted to the magnetized metal of vessels. The degaussing of ships tended to be an arduous process in those days, and it involved a stay in dry dock, and most of the electronic equipment on board a ship had to be removed while it was being degaussed. This was a method that was really impractical for wartime use. The creation of a strong field of some type that could be controlled to instantly demagnetize ships proved to be a much better idea. Each ship could be provided with the necessary equipment that would be carried on board at all times, so that the degaussing process could take place at any time. Although the degaussing aspect of the Philadelphia experiment was promising and important, it was in no way the end game. The second and more important goal of the Philadelphia experiment was to make Navy ships invisible to radar. It's no secret that the Germans were developing powerful radar systems in those days that could track ships from a great distance. In fact, by 1942, plans were already underway to equip new German multi-purpose aircraft with radar-guided bombs. Information obtained after the war proved this fact to be true. The scientists and engineers that developed the technology for the Philadelphia experiment saw the degaussing work as a way to get their feet in the door with the military. They had ideas that went far beyond degaussing and radar invisibility, but the demagnetizing project allowed them access to government officials and government money. With a potential price tag of millions of dollars for what they really had in mind, they needed time to explain and prove their ideas to the military. The Navy was the perfect start. President Franklin Roosevelt had been Assistant Secretary of the Navy under President Woodrow Wilson and was appointed to that position in 1913. Now, as president, he was known to have a great deal of respect and affection for the Navy. He'd certainly be interested in anything that would help military vessels evade U-boats and enemy ships. You'll hear more about the history of the experiment during the interview, but the end game for the scientists and engineers involved was complete invisibility and more. With a one-time chance at millions of dollars in government money that would likely go away after the war, they had a chance to take pet theories and ideas and turn them into reality. Knowing how notoriously skeptical naval officers were about new technologies and ideas, they had to prove that the ideas could work, and did so by staging demonstrations and tests over a period of time. Not all the tests went well, as you'll see, and it was obvious that more control over the new technology was needed, but the scientists and engineers involved produced results that the Navy could not ignore. The Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton University in New Jersey was the home of most of the scientists and engineers involved with the Philadelphia experiment. Einstein made his home at the Institute and is said to have been involved directly with the experiment. It's a historical fact that he was under contract to the Department of the Navy during World War II. The work he did for them remains secret. Other great minds, like John von Neumann and Nikola Tesla, were also involved. A number of the prodigies who worked with these great minds also worked on the Philadelphia experiment. I tend to believe that the entire saga began because these prodigies urged Einstein and others that they worked for to pursue the practical application of theories they developed at the Institute by contacting the military. If these theories could be proven true, there could be a chance at millions of dollars in government money, and actually this would be a chance for the prodigies to establish their own reputations and their own areas of development using those much-needed government funds. With the nearby Philadelphia Naval Shipyard and its assets placed at their disposal, things moved forward to the point where sea trials of the technology were planned and carried out in the early 1940s. During one of these trials, a hyperspace portal, or window, or stargate if you will, was opened, which transported two of the sailors from the test ship to another place in space and time. That place was the Montauk base, where the technology originally developed from the Philadelphia experiment was now being used on even more advanced and bizarre projects, as you'll soon see. The time was the 1980s, and the place was the eastern end of Long Island, near the historic Montauk Lighthouse. There's a great deal more to this story, and I'll allow the interview participants to fill in the blanks for you. And you'll certainly want to listen carefully because it's quite a story. When I first went to this special event, I must say I was skeptical and ready not to believe most of what was going to be said simply because it didn't fit into what I thought about technology and government and things of that nature, even though I've been a paranormal investigator for many years and investigated a number of outrageous UFO claims, some true, some not. But I did approach it as objectively as possible. And in fact, as you'll see, I brought people with me to help verify these claims. But let me give you a little bit of information about the people that were involved in this interview session. Let's begin with Preston Nichols. He was born on Long Island, New York, in 1946. He has degrees in parapsychology, psychology, and electrical engineering. Preston worked for most of his life in defense electronics and wound up at Brookhaven National Labs and AIL. In 1968, Preston's involvement with Montauk began. He got involved with the tail end of stealth research at AIL. Preston was told that the research started right after the Philadelphia experiment. He actually read the final report of Project Rainbow, which was what was known as the Philadelphia experiment in those days. The report named the Cameron brothers as being the Navy liaison in the experiment. Next, he got pulled into the Mind Sciences project at Montauk. They were working on interfacing a person's mind to a computer. Preston worked with Al Bielek on the psychic aspects of the Montauk Chair and the Montauk Boys program. Preston trained the Montauk Boys to be PSI warriors. The Montauk Chair used subtle quantum fields to read a person's thoughts. The psychic would lay in the chair, go into a trance, and a group of coils picked up the emanations. A bank of radio receivers designed by Tesla could pick up and digitize the thought, turning thought into computer code. The radar tower was used to turn thought into reality. This chair was used for many purposes. One was to open up a vortex for time travel. Many Montauk boys were lost due to the initial testing of the time vortex. Now let me introduce you to Al Bielek. Al Bielek has led a life that most would not choose to lose. While many would think that time travel, meeting aliens, and working on secret projects are exciting ventures, Al paid a big price for the privilege. Because those who set the agenda wished to keep their activities secret, Al was robbed of his family, his memories, and ultimately his identity. They used advanced technologies to erase what was dear to him. However, their technologies were not perfect. Slowly but surely, the memories came back to Al. Al started meeting others who had been through the same process, and ultimately a flood of memories returned that would allow him to tell his story in his own words. Al has been involved for many years in electrical engineering. Duncan Cameron is one of the central figures in the Philadelphia experiment and Montauk Project saga. According to Al, Duncan was his brother when Al was Ed Cameron, who jumped off the USS Eldridge in 1943 and landed into the future. When they wound up in 1982 or 83 at Montauk, they were both sent back to the USS Eldridge to destroy the equipment that was keeping the ship in hyperspace. Al Bielek says that before the Eldridge rematerialized, Duncan jumped back off the ship and returned back to 1983. He was used extensively as a psychic in the Montauk Project. He became one of the principal psychics who manned the Montauk chair. The chain was used to create and hold the frequency required to perform the time travel and mind control activities. If this plot, if you will, sounds suspiciously like the theatrical movie, The Philadelphia Experiment, it should. It's thought that the movie came out at a time and was produced at a time when basically the story of Montauk was going to come out anyway, because despite all the brainwashing techniques that were being used and thought masks, some of the people remembered. And what a great way to have plausible denial if a movie were to come out before anyone talked, and the movie was obviously portrayed as a fictional story, so that anyone telling a story after that would be thought to be claiming something that was nothing but pure fiction. The interview was filmed by me in the Long Island home of a friend of Preston and Al. With strange cargo vans circling the neighborhood while the session was conducted, on a chilly day after Thanksgiving in 1989, and lots of nervous participants, I filmed as best I could without special lighting or anything that might detract those present from the task at hand. I was able to use microphones placed near those that were involved, so the sound quality isn't bad. Among those present at this sort of micro event were a small, specially invited group of paranormal researchers, psychics, and journalists. A friend of mine who wrote a number of technical manuals, including some for the space shuttle, and also worked in the defense industry, was there to provide me with verification of the technological claims by Preston and Al. Not only did he verify it, but hearing the story kept him up for days afterward and made him wonder why he and others working on government contracts were not allowed access to this amazing technology.
Thank Preston, Al, and Cameron for being here tonight. Really, for all of us eccentrics, we are thoroughly pleased to hear about the Rainbow Project, the Philadelphia Experiment, the Phoenix Project, all that good stuff. And so I guess you can all take it the way you want, as one after another, while he puts on his sunglasses. And this is really, I think, a memorable event. And so you guys can take on the project, and thanks for being here. Go ahead.
Preston, why don't you start?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're here tonight. We have with us Mr. Bielek, who is from the Eldridge for the Philadelphia Experiment, the older fellow that went back to 43. We also have with us Mr. Cameron, who is also off the Eldridge. Two of the craziest people in the world.
Now, compliment. They're not so crazy, they survived.
Here at the auspices of the, what's it, Galuppi?
Filippo Galuppi.
Galuppi brothers.
Right.
We're here in this nice, beautiful home in Blue Point. This home has to be at least $250,000.
I hope so. Three-quarter.
Or $750,000, whatever. And I don't know what we're going to talk about.
Why don't you start with what Montauk was about, how it tied into the Philadelphia Experiment.
A brief synopsis, maybe, of the...
Okay, first of all, I got to find the
However, you want to start with Philadelphia and then go to
however you want it, how it ties in.
I first have to find the power cord. I got a place to plug this power cord in to start up the tape recorder.
Go.
There, plugged in. Alright, way back when. Let's start with the Phoenix Project. Phoenix Project is a carry-on from the Philadelphia experiment. That was a...
Can you hear them? Can you hear them okay?
That was a silly little project that the Navy did back in the 30s and the 40s, attempting to make a battleship invisible. They wanted to make an aircraft carrier invisible. They threw the switch one eventful day, and the ship went into hyperspace, caused all sorts of problems for the people on the boat. Navy said the thing's a huge failure, it's a huge success, but it's also a huge failure, and they shelved it. In about 47, it was decided, the government can't leave this thing alone. They got a wild effect that they wanted to study. So in 47, they reopened it and started up with what we came later to know as the Phoenix Project. It was originally the Rainbow Project. It was moved to Brookhaven National Laboratories, and Dr. von Neumann and all his associates, this was long before any of us were involved in it, started to replicate this thing. Out of the Phoenix 1, the early project, came the stealth technology, which I cannot talk about. Either of these two guys could talk about the stealth technology, but I cannot talk about it because of my job. And also came out all sorts of energetic little toys, such as radiosondes. What is a radiosonde? Well, if you remember all back when we were kids, we saw these little white plastic boxes that had a white bottle hanging down on it that they connected to a little red parachute, filled up a balloon with helium, connected the whole thing, and up in the atmosphere it went. The government told us, hey, this thing is a weather data package. It has a temperature sensor, has a humidity sensor, and it has a pressure sensor in it. And this thing will alternately transmit temperature data, humidity data, temperature data, reference data. And the switching was controlled by the barometric pressure at the height by what they call the baro switch. This thing used a very unusual type of pulse modulation. In most cases, they used a CW, continuous wave oscillator, and pulsed the thing off. The pulse was pulsing it off. This turned out to be a very efficient conversion of electrical energy to etheric energy. Now, I very recently started collecting radiosondes. I don't know why, but I did. I walked in with a radiosonde, and one of the associates at Space-Time Laboratory says, things are a weather control device. So, of course, that piqued my interest. I'd already known that the humidity sensor was terrible. Its accuracy was a lot to be desired. I'd known the temperature sensor was terrible, and its accuracy had a lot to be desired. And the other unusual thing that I've wondered about is, I can get all the radiosondes I want. I've never, ever seen a receiver for them. So, we first did a quote-unquote psychic reading. See, Space-Time Laboratories, everybody uses CAD, computer-aided designs. At Space-Time Laboratories, we use psychic-aided design. So we had a number of different psychics read on the radiosondes. Weather control device, doorbuster, orgone enhancer. That's the readings that came through. So I got very interested, and I started to ask around about radiosondes. The next thing I found out by word of mouth is these things were designed at Brookhaven National Laboratories up in Long Island, New York, just up the road from this place. And I started to talk to people I know at Brookhaven. Ran across a retired gentleman from Brookhaven who wishes to remain nameless, so I won't name him. He'll stay anonymous. He told me that the design was originally done by a character by the name of Wilhelm Reich. Of course, that piqued my interest even more. Wilhelm Reich. The story goes that in about 47, Mr. Reich handed the U.S. government a weather control device, a little package that would do door busting. He felt that if he could reduce the amount of door and increase the orgone in the storm wouldn't be violent, it wouldn't have winds, and it wouldn't do the damage. It would be a less violent storm.
What is the DOR?
Deadly orgone. Dead orgone. That's the bad stuff.
And where does that come from?
No one really knows where it comes from. I've heard a number of theories. Well, essentially, orgone can be considered like life energy, energy from life forces, energy from living beings. Dead orgone is same type of energy but dead. It doesn't have any life in it. It has a tendency to decrease life functions. It reduces life functions. So the government took this little widget that Mr. Wright handed them. He told them, put it on a balloon, send it up. Of course, they put a parachute on it because they didn't want the thing coming down with a big, loud, crashing bang through somebody's skylight, and the government gets sued for all sorts of money. And they send the thing up into a bad storm, and it gets reduced in intensity tremendously. So the government goes back to Reich and says, hey, we like the thing. So they launch another part of the Phoenix Project where they designed these radio songs. This is almost like a little subsection of this, by the way, this story. Now, of course, I dug further and further into it. As I already noted, I talked of the receiver. There are instances where we know they launched these things from every boat at sea, every airport, every weather station. They launched them from planes. At one point in the 50s, there must have been maybe 200 to 500 of these things launched every day. The radio range, being a radio person, I can tell you about that. I checked it. The radio range on these transmitters, even up in the air, maybe is 100 miles. So that means when they launch one of these frequencies, there had to be a receiver close by. They're going to send up a data transmitter and now have, they have to have a receiver. That means if they're sending 200 or more of these things up each day, it's got to be one pile of receivers. These receivers should be very common. Now, I happen to be a receiver collector. I have over 100 receivers in my personal collection of receivers. I have never seen a Radiosonde receiver. I've heard them, but I've never seen one. I got almost every other receiver that was used in the 40s and the 50s by the military.
I have a question. What is the center frequency without modulation on the Radiosonde transmitter?
403 megahertz and 1680 megahertz. They use two different frequencies.
They're both on simultaneously?
Huh?
They're both on simultaneously?
No, it's one or the other.
One for primary and one for secondary?
No, it's one transmitter or the other transmitter that's in the package. The early ones are on 403. The later ones,
exactly?
oh, plus or minus 2 megahertz. And the later ones are on 1680, plus or minus about 6 megahertz.
They were crystal tuned or?
No, they were just free running oscillators.
Free running oscillators.
The 400 megahertz, I was going to get into the details, technical details, how the Radiosonde worked. All right, this is a good time to go into that. I don't have any illustrative material, so I'll have to attempt to describe to you people how the circuitry worked. It's a very unique system that they had. Essentially, the temperature element was a thermistor type. It is a negatively varying resistance with the temperature. As the resistance goes up, as the temperature goes up, the resistance goes down. Now, I had a mass spectrograph done on one of these thermistors, and I compared it to a YSI thermistor. And they both have carbon in them. They both are essentially carbon, but the Radiosonde thermistor had some silver in it, had some gold in it, had some platinum in it, had some iridium. I'm trying to remember the other two elements it had. It has a fair amount of silver in it. Silver was about 10% by weight. Now, for a thermistor, it's not going to make it any more accurate. If anything, it's going to make the curve go really strange. You're doping it with metals like that. Of course, you read Wilhelm Reich literature, you'll find out Reich used sensors that had gold and silver in them. So that's one interesting note there. The humidity element is a plastic plate with silvered edges with a grid of conductive lines going across the plastic plate. You know, this way and this way. You know, this way, this way, this way, this way, this sort of thing. They put on it a very odd mix of chemicals. The chemistry lab has not come back yet what the mix of chemicals is they put on it. Now, the unusual thing about the temperature, the humidity element, is most electrolytic resistors I've ever seen, the resistance goes down as they get damp. These things, the resistance goes up as they get damp. Now, what we're theorizing at this point, which we've proven from the esoteric side, we have no physical data to back it up, is that the thermistor rod, the temperature sensor, the temperature rod, acts like an antenna for the door. It acts like a door antenna out of phase. That's the dead orgone. The humidity sensor acts as an antenna for the orgone. Of course, this parallels the whole idea of, you'll see in esoteric circles, people use salt water solutions with different electrodes in them to detect these energetics with a fair degree of success. Looks like here, Reich took it much further. Now, the pressure sensor is essentially what they call a barrow switch, or a pressure-sensitive cycling switch. As the thing would rise, the pressure would change, and the needle in the little barometer would go across a switch segment, hit the segments of a switch. That drove a relay that would in sequence put either the temperature or the humidity sensor back and forth. It would switch between these two sensors. Then it would switch to, which I'll explain in a minute how it's done, to what they call a reference mode in the transmitter. So what they have, as this thing rises and goes above the earth, it transmits a signal that destroys the door, and also transmits a signal after that, or before, however you look at it, that builds up the orgone energies. Now, let's consider the transmitter. The transmitter is a very interesting little beast. It is two oscillators. An oscillator that runs at the carrier frequency, the 403 megahertz or 1680 megahertz. There's a second oscillator, which is a 7 megahertz oscillator coupled into the grid of the carrier oscillator. Now, the control grid of the modulation oscillator, the 7 megahertz oscillator, has an RC network that causes it to do the relaxation number. Now, as the oscillator runs, it builds up DC across the grid when the capacitor that's in the RC network for the relaxation oscillator. I have to apologize, I don't have any schematics with me. I didn't expect to talk of this, but there was interest at the table. As that capacitor will build up high enough in charge to put a high negative bias on the grid of the tube, cut the tube off, the oscillator will stop oscillating, of course. The RC network would discharge and pull the voltage down on the capacitor just like a neon bulb oscillator. So essentially that 7 megahertz oscillator would pulse on and off. Now, the lower the resistance, the faster the pulsing would be, and the higher resistance, the slower the pulsing would be. I'm trying to make this as clear as I can without having a schematic to point out. I know, are the two people here following what I'm saying that have some technical background? Now, they did not couple the 7 megahertz directly into the grid of the carrier oscillator. It couples in through an RC network where the first resistor is in series with the plate coil. It's between the B plus and the B plus end of the plate coil. They have a capacitor going to ground, a bypass capacitor that integrates the function. Then they RC couple with a series capacitor and a resistor going to ground on the oscillator of the carrier oscillator. Well, what happened, whenever the modulation oscillator would click in, turn on, it would cut off the carrier oscillator and shut it off. Of course, etheric signals are already differentiated, So it means when you put the differentiated signal through the integrated network, it comes out in its real form in that final amplifier, that final oscillator.
Wouldn't that circuit also attenuate the instantaneous spike? In other words, like there's a de-emphasis network.
Yes,
From
that's what
primary oscillator. That was the intent, wasn't it? Primary oscillator and the.
We don't know what the intent was behind it. That's what it appears to be. It's an integrator, which is a de-emphasis.
Right.
A differentiator is your emphasis network. You're thinking of. See, in engineering, as a technician, you talk of de-emphasis and emphasis. In engineering, we talk of integration and differentiation. And being trained in that's what I talk of. So the etheric signal or the hyperspatial signal, the orgone is already differentiated. It can't do anything. It's 90 degrees out of phase to begin with. This integration network brings it back in phase for the transmitter to transmit it. Now, also, you have to keep in mind that when the tube goes from a semi-saturated mode, as it is when the carrier oscillator is oscillating the cutoff, there are other things taking place from the zero-point potential. When the tube is cut off, any of the etheric signal that's stored in the tube will be pushed out the antenna. Also, when you cut the tube off, when you go from saturation to cutoff, and from cutoff to saturation again, you're essentially ripping open the vacuum from the viewpoint of the Dirac space that he derived in the 30s. And you'll get an amplification. These transmitters only put out about a half a watt of CW RF power. The etheric content or the non-real power was equivalent to about a 250 watt transmitter. That's how efficient these little things were.
Can you describe the phase relationship between the RF output power and the etheric power and the frequency difference between the two?
Okay, the frequency should be the same. The phase relationship...
Cosine? Would it be a cosine function?
Let's see, what would it be? It would have to be, it would come out of the differential equation relating the baseband to the carrier frequency. I think it'd be a tangent. I think it's a tangent function.
So it would rise sharply.
Yeah.
Until the next cycle.
Mm-hmm. That tells you that sends out the etherics in bursts. In other words, when this transmitter runs, the CW part of it, when the oscillator is on, it doesn't put out much etherics. But at the point where the oscillator shuts off, it sends out a huge burst of etheric signal. That's your tangent function. I just had to think for a minute of what it would be, the question, answer your question.
I have a totally different question. Who was in charge of this project, of the doorbusters? What department of the government?
This was under United University's Brookhaven National Labs. It was eventually turned over to the Signal Corps. Because most of these things were U.S. Army Signal Corps stuff. Even the one set up from the Weather Service was Signal Corps. So Signal Corps had ultimate charge of it.
So as you're talking about this whole system, how does that now get into what was happening in the 40s and the 80s?
Okay. Okay, let's finish this off a little. Where was I? Questions always break a train of thought.
You were describing basically the system of the doorbusters.
All right, the government could not tell the public that these things were weather control devices. They were keeping that secret. How'd they guard the secret? Two ways. They first showed a few receiving stations constructed to receive these things, put out that line. The personnel that launched them would laboriously calibrate them. Thirdly, the special tube that's in the radiosondes, they would list in the tube manual as a whole bunch of baloney. Essentially, they'd be saying that only a few hours of life. That means that the ham over there picked one up, looked at the tube manual, the 7533 is only going to last a few hours, he's not going to use it. And that worked very well. As I already mentioned, I've never seen a receiver. That says they didn't use a receiver with these things. This is why, this is the hard data, besides the psychic data I base that the story is correct. All right, what we're seeing here actually is in actuality the genesis of the Montauk Project. The Montauk Project was Phoenix 2. The Montauk Project is a combination of Wilhelm Reich's work in the Philadelphia experiment. It was like two separate little projects going on in Phoenix 1. You had the development of the invisibility and its human factor study. Also, you had the development of Wilhelm Reich's weather control.
So that was Phoenix 1?
Yeah, that's
right?
Phoenix 1, and they converged. Towards the end of the Phoenix Project, by using some of Wilhelm Reich's concepts and some of the modulation schemes gleaned from the Radiosonde project, coupling, I know you're looking puzzled, this is what I found last week. Coupling that to the equipment that was used on the boat in the later invisibility project, they found out to couple the two, you now could use this for mind control. I'm not saying mood alteration. I know Governor Circle would rather have me say mood alteration. Here, I'm calling a spade of a spade. Mind control. That's what these idiots were doing. They're not actually idiots. That's what these people were doing.
That's what the Montauk project was?
No, the Phoenix 1.
Phoenix 1.
The end of Phoenix 1, of course, what happened? Congress, the political government heard, hey, these guys are playing with mind control. They don't want that. So they told them, hey guys, cut it out. We don't want you looking into mind control. That's a no-no. So, of course, the project was stopped. It was shut down. Does anyone here think it was really shut down? No, of course not. The people that were running this project went to the military and said, hey, we got this nifty little project going. We can eventually use this to influence the mind of the enemy to give up and to surrender. We need a place to do this. We got to do this undercover now. So, of course, the military, they love the idea. You know, they love something, throw a switch and the enemy puts down all their weapons and comes up hands in the air. They love this. So the military was sold a bill of goods. And the military was said, okay, you can use the old Montauk Air Force Base. It's dead, it's derelict. Also, some of the equipment you requested is on that base, the old Sage radar. So the base was shut down, everything was auctioned off, but the Sage radar was left behind. And the whole group moved from the Brookhaven Labs out to Montauk. That's Phoenix 2. Of course, they spent the first 10 years from about 1969 to about 1979 researching pure mind control. They started out by taking the output of the Sage radar, modulating it to special ways that they came up with that Reich had shown them from the weather control process, and combining that with stuff they noticed from the Philadelphia experiment work and the stealth work. And they were hitting these poor bastards with the microwave beam out of the Sage transmitter direct. Sage transmitter transmitted at about 400 megahertz, 406 megahertz, I believe most of the time it was set at. It would hop around frequency a little. It would change in phase. It was pulse modulated. They used the Amplidyne concept where you had many stages pulse modulated. Each one was pulse slightly different to build a form in the final stage.
Do you know the specific pulse width or frequency of the pulse width?
VRF was anywhere from 10 cycles to about 750 cycles. The pulse width, depending upon how they loaded up the capacitors, the voltage could be varied anywhere from about 10 microseconds to about 75 microseconds. The center frequency was 406 megahertz, generated from a stay low type function, which was referenced from a zero time function.
Was there any other modulation on this, phase modulation, frequency?
There was phase modulation, there was frequency hopping on it. Now this is as I saw it when I got on the station. I'm first trying to account what our digging and psyching and digging and talking to different people told us was the genesis of this thing. Let's keep all the technical questions till later. Okay?
But let me straighten out the chronology. Phoenix 2 then, it would start in 1969?
Yeah, about 69, 70, 71, somewhere in there.
Phoenix 1 went from basically from World War
48 to 68.
II to 68.
Now, essentially,
Yeah.
the first part of the mind control project was to take an individual such as Duncan here, stand them maybe, 250 feet away from that antenna. As I was starting to go into what the SAGE radar was capable of. The SAGE radar had a peak pulse power of a 0.5 megawatt. That's in the antenna. The antenna had a gain of 30 dB. So that means you're a megawatt. It has a peak pulse power, effective radiated power of at least a gigawatt. This is nominally a gigawatt. Can you imagine what that would do to people? I think it's amazing that the people are still here today that have been hit with this. It does such things as burn out brains, functions, and neurological damage. And you look inside of a person's lung that had this done, it'll look like the lung is all scarred from the heat generated, and it just goes on with physical damage done to the body by this sort of thing. They tried this with a number of people, a few survivors, in this sort of thing.
Where they get the volunteers for this?
They were just grabbing indigenous people off the street and throwing them in front of the radar beam, and let's see what happens. That's the sort of nonsense that the government loves to do.
Who was in charge of the project at this time? It was covered now.
And Mr. Jack Pruitt was in charge. All right.
Along with Dr. John Van Neumann.
In any particular agency?
I'm not sure what the agency was. Now, somebody got the brilliant idea, upon the urging of the different people, they got the idea. We're not sure who came up with this idea first. The signal they really want goes through the reflector. Let's take the big banana peel, that's what's called reflector, turn around 180 degrees and put the subjects directly in line with the gain horn feeding the antenna. Lo and behold, they got their results and then burned the people up. The poor bastards survived. They hit them with this signal. But they found out by varying the phase modulation, the frequency hopping, and the pulsing of the multiple stages, that they could have profound effects on a person's mind.
Could you describe some of them?
I think these two gentlemen here could describe them much better than I can. But let's not go into that at this point. Yeah, why not? Let's at this point break from the technical description of the first, what I consider to be the real mind control work that they had done that was successful. Let's go into some of the effects. Mr. Bielik and Mr. Cameron, I think, can do more on this than I can.
But that was the goal in mind control of this whole project.
That was
the started goal.
That was the first goal.
Yeah.
And how many people more or less worked altogether on the base? Approximately.
That varied.
About 30.
About 30.
Who authorized them to go on the base? Who authorized them use of the base?
Air Force. The Air Force and the Navy.
Air Force and Navy?
In conjunction? Air Force and Navy worked together?
Yeah, this was a joint project. There was both Navy personnel in it and the Air Force personnel in it.
Yeah.
We even have copies of the orders of the Air Force personnel.
And what was the cover story for the base? They must have had something.
They had none.
No?
It was a derelict base.
It was abandoned. It was turned over to GSA as surplus
In 1970.
around 69, 70 when they shut down all the SAGE radar systems. That, in other words, there was a non-existent operation.
Right.
There was no government coverage for it. There was no government payment. There was a surplus base which allegedly had nothing on it. So it was the perfect cover.
Where'd they get the funding?
It was totally private.
Yep.
Private corporations?
Essentially.
It didn't originally come from corporations. It did in the later phases. The original money came from the Nazis, the Nazi government. In 1944, there was a raid.
That was Phoenix 1.
No, that wasn't
Phoenix
not
1.
Phoenix 1. This is Phoenix 2 and Phoenix 3.
Really?
Yep.
In 1944, there was a American troop train that went through a French railroad tunnel carrying $10 billion in Nazi gold, which they had found. This is documented in a movie on the old Patton scenario, in which this train was dynamited in the tunnel, killed 51 GIs, and of course Patton, who was then in Europe, decided he had to investigate this. He couldn't understand how an American troop train in the Western Territory was dynamited in a French railroad tunnel. And he was concerned about the loss of 51 GIs, and also, as it turned out, $10 billion in gold disappeared. That was $10 billion in the valuation of the then existing European prices of $20 per ounce, not 400. The gold disappeared. It turned up 10 years later in the U.S. at Montauk. This has been verified since. And that money, that gold, was used to finance the project initially, and for many years, because the value went up, as the value of gold went up, to approximately 100 billion plus. And they spent all of it and ran out of money.
That's when they tapped ITT.
And that's when they tapped ITT, who then from that point on funded it, because ITT was owned by a certain German group known as the Krupps.
Okay.
And that was, again, the same Nazi connection. Now, in terms of personnel, many of the scientists, the civilian people and scientists there, were all ex-Nazis who came from Nazi Germany, either after the war was over with Werner von Braun, or were snuck in before the war, as was Dr. Unterman and a few others. But the whole thing was basically a civilian project run by the Nazis with a U.S. government surveillance, you might say. The intelligence community knew what was going on. The CIA monitored everything, as probably did well other government intelligence agencies. But the field of players, if you will, those who actually operated on the base, was small, 30 to 50. And the funding was entirely private. At a very later stage, after the whole thing was over, then, I mean, after 83, there was some investigation started by a certain senator from Arizona, I think his name was Goldwater. They couldn't find any trace of government funding, no government oversight committees, no payments of money of any kind, no appropriations, nothing. They went absolutely bananas trying to figure out how a project of that magnitude and that scope could have been funded when there was no government money.
Thing the senator would like to know.
That's right. See, Pruitt was Air Force. He was an Air Force colonel, I believe.
How did you get Air Force personnel assigned to a derelict base?
Right. Pruitt had his office in the Pentagon. I found that out through other connections. And he was the basic director through the whole of Phoenix 2 and 3, though actually they had two directors. They had the so-called psychic metaphysical director, which was Pruitt, and they had a hardware electronics director, who was originally Dr. Van Neumann. And after he left, Dr. Unterman took over, Hermann C. Unterman from Germany. And they also had an electronics expert who, through most of the period of time, was a Dr. Matthew E. Zarrett, who came in with Werner von Braun in 46. In fact, I understudied the man, strangely enough, in New York College of Engineering in Newark, New Jersey. He was my college prof there. And I didn't know a thing about his connections or his background or that he had come from Germany. Lo and behold, he turns up there. Private funding all the way until, well, actually 100%.
78.
Until it was over, there was still private funding through ITT.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
The government never spent a cent on it.
The gold, I think, ran until about 78.
Approximately
ITT
that.
got heavily in about 78, 79.
One of the reasons why they ran out of money was the fact that there was eventually not one base, but 25.
Yeah.
All Sage bases, 25 of them were utilized for the same program.
And
They were
money
running
went
in
all
parallel.
over.
And eventually they shut down until the end, I believe. That is the info we have, is there were only 3 still operational, and they were tied together by satellite.
But they shut down quite late in the program.
Yeah. They shut
How
down.
recently were they operating? When did they finally shut down?
The last of them shut down August 12, 1983.
That was Montauk.
And that was Montauk. It was the final.
Well,
When it went down, it shut the other 2 or whatever that were still operating with it by a satellite down. So
when Montauk went down, they had to go down because that's where they got their zero time.
Correct.
Was from Montauk.
Yeah. Montauk was the key station.
Yeah. So they automatically went down. All right, so
Well, you asked, or the question was asked, what about some of the mind effects?
yeah.
I'll try to answer that. and say, from what I recall of the program, because I was part of it also, as well as Duncan,
As an officer or a
civilian.
civilian who is used?
Used is the correct term, very definitely used.
You were
Both of these
subjected
guys
to
were
the,
used.
Well, yes, I was subjected to the, let's say, the mind control field, not as I initially went in the program, because they wanted me at one point for my psychic metaphysical abilities, and you don't subject a person who is sensitive to those kind of fields because they know they will wipe them out or alter them so drastically that they're useless. But they assigned me to a particular part of the program involving the indoctrination of the younger recruits, we'll put it that way. And after, let us say, one of the first attempts at indoctrination, which turned out to be a total disaster, I said, there's no way I will have any part of this program, no matter what you do or say. So they said, oh, yes, you will. And I said, well, no, I won't. So they put me in front of this roasting oven, if you will, the mind beam, and it did do damage to me. And finally, somebody else said, shut it off. He isn't going to give in to it. I suffered some damage, but not severe damage as some others did. And it did affect me to some extent. Duncan was affected much more heavily for other reasons. But nevertheless, the effects were, in some cases, totally disastrous. They burned brains out and the people just dropped dead. Now, neither of us were among those category, but there were other recruits, young kids they picked up, you might say, off the streets, wherever they could find them. The basic age bracket was between 12 and 16.
So that's where a lot of the disappearing
Yes.
kids disappear.
10,000, we estimate, went to Montauk. The total number would be about 250,000 with the 25 stations estimated. What the actual final directives, what the final thrust of the program was in terms of these kids, we had never come up with the answers. They wanted them fully programmed for something, and we've never found out why. And eventually they disappeared off the station. They were sent to various locations and places. But they were initially subjected to one form of programming, and then later on it changed into a somewhat more humane, a somewhat faster and less obtrusive form of programming and conditioning using the electronic techniques. The original was Reichian and was more physical and was less sophisticated. The later programs, after they worked out the techniques to use of computers, electronic programming, and the electronic use of the Reichian techniques, and it became very fast, very quick, and usually took very well with no side effects. And these kids would never know what happened to them. They shipped them back to where they got them or to wherever they wanted them to go. They would know the better.
Are you aware of the names or identities or the present locations of any of the individuals?
I've run into a number of people over the years, let's say in the last 3 years, since I've become aware of the program and the fact that I was part of it. There is a very specific field identity pattern you can detect. If you're sensitive enough to read human auras, you can spot a person that's been through the Montauk program 5 miles away. Their auras are very distinctive in the way that they have been altered. You can tell them immediately if you know what you're looking for. And I've spotted many. I would say over a dozen. Mostly in the Long Island, New York area.
Wasn't von Neumann was officially dead, right? Well,
Correct. Officially he was dead, but he was very much alive throughout this entire program, all the way through '83 and for quite some time after that, up into this year, through this year.
Oh, these past families afterwards?
Don't know exactly the whole story of what's happened to von Neumann since, because he ran into a problem with the government, and he ran into two problems. One, he suffered a personality split himself about 1977. Whether it was because of some of the experiments he was on or the strain, we don't know. But he resigned as director. He said he was no longer fit. The government wouldn't leave him alone. They wouldn't let him leave. They said you will remain as a consultant, which was agreeable to him, to the balance of the program. Because there were other reasons why he had to be there, which goes back into the whole Philadelphia experiment. But he remained on as a consultant. At the end, he told them, he says, when this program is over, he says, I'm not going to work for the government again ever, no matter what you say. He says, I'm through with you. He says, I want no further part of any of your government operations. And he retired to his little farm and led a relatively peaceful life for a period of time until he was harassed again in the last year, year and a half. That's not part of the Montauk thing.
Right.
Was he living under another name then?
He was.
Mhm.
He was living under a pseudonym.
When did he officially die?
1957.
57.
That's the official death date.
What happened to the other scientists? Fruit and, what was it, Interman?
Fruit was there until 83.
Yeah.
And then he went and worked in different corporations and disappeared.
Hunterman was seen to turn up. You ran into him.
Yeah, a couple of times, that was it.
Yeah, and then he
Other than
disappeared.
ran for the hills, I think.
Most of them did. They ran for the hills.
Well, let's continue on the description of the Phoenix Project.
I just have one more question about the Montauk. Were any of the subjects given psychotropic substances? LSD,
mushrooms.
I don't know.
We don't believe so.
My gut feeling is no.
in conjunction with the.
I don't believe they were.
No, they used other drugs. They had one drug that would be used in connection with the Reich programming. It would make them more receptive.
This was not.
Do you know
part
the name of the drug, the chemical name, or a generic name?
No, I don't.
I have no knowledge of
Can you
that at all.
describe any of the effects of that alone, or in conjunction with the?
Okay, the effects would make you horny as hell.
Uh-huh.
That's essentially what it would do. It would make you very sexually active.
Also euphoric at the same time.
Yeah.
And euphoric?
Well, that would go along with it.
Right.
What was the purpose of being euphoric?
All right.
Makes you more
Essentially,
open
I
to
don't.
Or they get the chair from the aliens?
We're not sure whether they got the chair itself from the aliens, but
Did
the
they get a
technology
prototype from
base
the aliens?
came. Yes, the prototype came from the aliens.
Willingly
They produced
or
it.
from a crashed saucer?
Maybe
exchange of sorts.
we don't know.
Also, I had another question on what you were describing before. Could this experience that is becoming very common of the UFO abduction could have been programmed by the
Highly.
government under this mind control?
Sure, it could be. Not all of it is, but some of it probably is.
Some of it.
All right, but they got this chair from the aliens, or through some connection. Another associate of ours was on the station managing money, and he actually went out and bought this chair from somebody. He hasn't been able to dig out yet who. So what they essentially did is they took this chair, they made one computer to interface the chair itself to stay in the digital codes, and then another computer to interface it to a special computer to the transmitter, and then the transmitter. What they actually ended up with, in essence, was a mind amplifier. Duncan here, his major responsibility on the station, he was one of the selected individuals. He had been through a lot of psychic training by the government to sit in that chair and generate thought form. The idea they had is, okay, they can transmit the signature digitally, that worked very well. They could put the person in the orgasmic state digitally, that worked very well. But they wanted a human being to generate the actual thought form, the details of what they wanted done.
From the chair.
From the chair, yeah. In other words, they would put into Duncan's mind, when he's in a trance, what they want him to think of, what they want him to think of that he's doing. The chair would pick it up. After the data was sent, that would turn on the target individual. His thoughts were channeled directly through the transmitter to the individual. It worked, but it didn't work. It worked very well, extremely well. But they found another capability. Let's say they would target Phil at Tuesday, 4 a.m. when he's asleep. You might actually discover that Phil was actually hit 2 weeks later. What did they discover? They did not lock the time in of the person. What did they get? They got a time machine. Next bright idea they got was, okay, let's tell Duncan to think of a vortex connecting 1981 to 1947. He would do this. What happened? They got a vortex going from 1981 to 1947. You can walk through. Great. Now,
Duncan you had to be really good to be able to visualize
Donovan's very good at
You have to
visualizing.
be really an expert, I would think.
Well, let's not go into that at this point.
Well, you're talking about it at this point, that's why I bring it up.
A master is a word in the dictionary.
It's a word I use. What you want.
Well, we're talking of earlier capabilities, not today. He was also raked over as well. But, you know, what they discovered is, okay, the real time he thought of it, what they discovered is they recorded it, put the tape on the computer, did the same thing again. So now they had a tape that would open a vortex. And they started going back in time, they started going ahead in time, they actually got the time machine. That's the last phase of the Phoenix project, was the time machine. Of
And
course,
they could control that time factor to where they wanted to
Yep.
go.
Right.
whatever he thought of, or other people like him. He wasn't the only one. They had to have at least 5 backups.
That was still phase 2.
That was phase 3.
Phase 3.
Yeah, was the time machine.
Now, that time machine, what do you know the date?
That got going about 79 to 80. They got that operational. Of course,
Fully operational?
yeah, about
They
79
can
to 80.
transmit both matter and,
Thought.
signals
Yeah,
and,
right. They had this, you could walk through the vortex. You could walk in 1981 and come out in 47.
Who, Cameron would, or the one?
Anyone.
Can you explain
I
again
don't-
how this was developed?
what was the mechanism behind it?
First of all, this
Right.
transmitter was so freaking powerful. This transmitter had enough power to warp space and time, go through Bearden's equations. There's more than enough power to do it. He had the capability of thinking of the vortex function that they couldn't synthesize. They didn't know how to synthesize that vortex function, but he knew. Innately, inherently, he knew how to do it.
Can it be mechanically synthesized right now?
I'm sure they got the tapes. I'm sure they got the tapes. Now, also, things they did was they would have the subject that's sitting in the chair think of a creature. And that creature would precipitate itself. They would have the subject think, there's a car coming up the road, stop the car. The car would stop, there'd be no electrical activity in it. They would have the subject in the chair think of change the direction of the fish, and the fish would do this sort of thing. They would have the subject think all the animals on Montauk Point are going to charge into the town. There's records of that even to this day, of all animal life coming off the point charging into the town. There'd be, you talk to the local kids, now they're young adults out at Montauk, that lived out at Montauk, you'll find out there's rumors of kids hearing big things stomping around the woods on the point. That's what came out of somebody's mind, precipitated through this huge mind amplifier. They almost had the power of creation. They could almost create a being. The problem they had is the being only stayed as long as the transmitter was on. Flip the switch. The being stopped all its mobility and faded back into hyperspace. But that's how powerful this thing was. This thing, you're talking gigawatts, and the etheric power of probably many, many terawatts. You're talking astronomical etheric power. Because they're using multiple pulse modulators, pulse-modulated amplifiers on top of pulse-modulated amplifiers, opening different windows from the drive of this amp to that amp, and you can encode all sorts of zero-point functions as you go through what they call the amplidyne function. See, the amplidyne is essentially a zero-point amplifier. So by the time they started pulsing the 100-watt stage, by the time they got out to the half a gigawatt output, the etheric power was up in the sky. This thing was tremendous. This transmitter, it took at times 2 generators supplying a megawatt each to run this thing. They were pumping 2 megawatts into this whole building, which you'll see pictures of. But, you know, I don't think I can overstate how much power, as far as we're concerned in this room, it's astronomical power this thing had. This thing literally had, if the person who was sitting in the chair thought of a time warp and a vortex, that vortex would form.
Excuse me, does this have any military applications that you're aware of? Silly question. but-
I can think of thousands.
And is that why,
millions
is that why Eastern Europe's almost free today? Because the Russians are simply scared of this? I don't know.
Who knows? There's also other thoughts that other outside groups are saying to the Earth government, you straighten up or ship out.
Well,
Who knows?
You said people could walk through this time vortex.
right.
Did you ever walk through the time vortex?
No comment.
Do you know anybody that did?
Oh, yes.
Could you describe at least the experience, or would you want to
Ow.
go into it?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
I did more than once, and it's weird, to say the least. The recollection is that you
First of all, how was it formed? Just at the beginning, before it's created, what do you see before it's created?
before it's
Describe
created,
it
you see
created.
nothing but the building or the
Or the
area
section.
that you're in.
You're in a chair or in
No.
an open space?
No, what they finally ended up doing was they took whatever Duncan or his alternates would generate, they put it on tape.
Okay.
Now, it could generate it inside the underground area, or it could generate the
From anywhere to anywhere.
or
Anywhere in
generate it
space
outside. It
time.
can be from any particular point where they chose to generate the origin, and it would go to the terminal
Wherever they
point.
want.
It could happen while you were,
was where?
The terminal point would be wherever they chose it to be.
and you could be driving a car when
Future,
this
the
happened.
past.
You probably,
I mean, what would happen if you were driving a car?
Your car will go through it.
if your car went into the entrance of it, yes, a car would go through and come out at the other end where it was. It could be 100 or 1,000 or 100,000 years in the future or the past.
You would actually.
I've run,
Let's go to that other time to describe what happened.
Whatever went in the beginning, the entrance would come out the other end.
I've run computer modeling.
I'm sorry?
Could the car be spatially dislocated? Could it be somewhere else in the universe?
Sure could.
Yes.
I've run computer modeling based upon calculations I've learned from the radio sirens and such, and the vortex could have a diameter of 5 miles. Could be a 5-mile opening, or of course they could bring it down.
We can send all of Long Island.
No.
So what was it like, Al? You were saying.
It's like looking into the entrance of a peculiar spiral tunnel which was lit all the way down. You would start to walk into this thing, and then suddenly you'd be pulled down it. You would more or less be projected. You didn't walk through it as such. You were more or less propelled through it.
You walked into it.
You walked into it, correct, start. Then you were propelled down the thing like some force grabbed you and pulled you through, and you come out the other end, wherever it is. You could be far in the past, you could be in the future, it could be very close by, and it could definitely be another place, physically, other than the point where you started and usually was.
Wherever whatever point in space and time the transmitter was set to transmit to.
Emphasize space and time,
Right.
because it could be anywhere in the universe.
Did you go
back or forward in time?
Either one.
Either way.
Were
What
you
was it
physically there? Could you interact with other things
Yes.
there?
Yes.
You could take You could take remnants back with you. You could take like for example, if you projected yourself to go to another planet, you could bring something back with you.
Sure,
Yes,
sure.
you could.
Has
So
that
if you
been
could
done?
live on the other planet.
Yeah, right. I can't answer that for certain, but I would say probably.
Have you ever personally brought anything back from another time, either past or future?
Yes.
Was it of terrestrial origin or?
Yes, in this case it was terrestrial origin. It was a Life magazine from the year 1983 to take it back to 1943, but that's part of the Philadelphia story.
That's still continuing the Phoenix Project yet.
Right.
How big?
You guys asked the question of what it was
Okay,
like.
the description of the vortex, please continue.
Well, the description was it was like a tunnel, coruscating corkscrew, sort of lit, sort of looked like the walls were,
Solid or moving?
they were solid, but they were fluted. It was not a solid bore through rock, as you would
Right.
think. It was a fluted sort of structure. And you would go down this, and you would be propelled down this tube, as it were, this tunnel, which was not straight. It was corkscrew. And it would not go in a straight line either. It would take some very strange turns, which we could not explain. But it did take turns, and you would come out at the other end, wherever you were supposed to come out, and meet somebody or do something at the other point.
Did
And
you have like a mission?
Yes. Then you would return. Then when whatever you were doing was completed, the tunnel would reopen for you and you go in the other direction, you walk back in it, go back to where you came from.
Exact reverse of what happened when you went there.
If someone switched off the power, would you be able to get back?
No.
No, you'd be
No,
lost in
you'd be
time
stuck
and
there.
space.
And they
That
never get
happened?
you back.
You would not get back.
People
unless-
were lost at
That's what I was
Montauk.
gonna ask.
People were lost.
Yeah.
Wow.
I've heard of that.
Was everyone who went through one of these programmees?
Possibly.
Possibly, we don't know of all of those people those young kids who were programmed, what the final intent was. We only have a little glimmering of part of it now, and this is in the last week or two, and it's very incomplete.
Was
It's been a
anything
mystery to us for a long time. What was the end goal of all of these kids being programmed? What did they want to do with them? I mean, 10,000 there and all the other stations? There had to be a reason.
When you said people were lost, does that mean that if the machine was turned off, instant disintegration or just abandoned in that time period?
It would depend on which happened first. In other words, if they went down the tunnel and got to their termination,
They were fine.
they were fine. And if the tunnel was turned off and they couldn't get it refocused to that area in time, that the person was lost there. They were abandoned, so to speak,
They were
and trapped in
floating
that
in
time or
hyperspace.
location. If the tunnel disintegrated while they were in transit, they were lost.
And if they
Disintegrated.
were abandoned in time,
Yeah, they could be abandoned.
and
in
this is
time.
going to be a sort of a philosophical question,
Yeah.
wouldn't they be angry and do something really wild to alter the future?
Depends on where they were abandoned.
Well, they did not abandon people in time. The problem was that the transmitter would glitch, and as you were in transit from time 1 to time 2, the tunnel would collapse,
Yeah.
and you were lost.
You might be lost intact, you might be lost in a form of being atomically disintegrated, in which
Who
case
knows?
you were totally lost.
But the philosophical question is valid. I mean, where you would go back in the past, could you alter the future?
Sure you
Of
can.
course.
Has it been done?
Has it
Say
been
right
done?
now?
Yes, there-
That's the reason we exist in a time loop right now. What we do from one end to what Montauk penetrated in the past to what we do to where Montauk penetrated in the future is now fixed. Because it's fed back on itself. It's now a fixed,
It is fixed.
it's fixed right now. Has to be because of that. It has to be fixed.
You went forward in time.
Went forward and backwards both. One of the first things they did with the raw recruits, as it were, after they passed the initial tests and examination to see if they were suitable for the program, and were found suitable. I don't know what the reason was, but I do remember that one of the things they did was they sent every raw recruit forward into the future to a year around 6030 AD, and it was always to the same point. Someplace in the future, in the middle of an abandoned city, with a square where there was still a statue in solid gold. And they would ask them to look at this and see what they saw after they came back. And they interpreted whatever the individual saw, for what purpose I'm not sure, but this was one instance where apparently all recruits were sent to this point in time to see what they saw, and whether they were expecting to find a different answer, and from person to person, I don't know.
Were they equipped with protective suits or equipment?
No, ordinary clothes.
That's if they were going to a friendly environment.
Yeah.
Well, if you're sending someone into the future, you know, into a possible nuclear...
Well, they first would look into the future through the vortex. They could sample the air, they could sample everything on this side.
Now, were there different potential futures that people could be sent to?
No, because once you make the first connection into the future, it's fixed. Anything from that future point back is fixed.
But what I'm saying is, are there different
That's the
alternate
reason the
futures
government
that they could go
times-
into?
The first projection, yes, there's multiple different futures. But once the first projection is made into the future, from that point back, from the future, let's say they project from 83 to the future.
Okay.
From this point back, it's not fixed. Because the fact that he went from here to here has not fixed the time
Even
flow.
after they turn off the machine
Yeah.
or whatever?
Because the fact they turned off the machine does not alter that he was here and then came back.
Then that sounds like you couldn't change the present by sending someone to the past.
Yes,
vice
you
versa.
can.
Definitely.
You can, yes.
Yes. You
Exactly.
can change the present by sending someone into the future, too,
Right.
for that matter.
Yep.
Not
How do
all
you
under
change the
certain-
present by sending someone into the future?
Under certain conditions, you can.
When it's a closed loop, you can.
Cameron, had you gone into the future at all?
Yes, I've seen the horse, which Al speaks of. It's
Oh, the golden statue.
the golden statue. It's a horse with no rider. It's an abandoned city. It's sort of like a dream state. It's very peculiar, where there is virtually no dynamic ability ongoing. It's a very stationary, almost frozen state.
No markings on the statue, no, you know what it was, what it referred to?
I don't think I can say.
Beyond that, you want to make any statements about anything else in the future that might interest people, or that you could talk about without doing damage?
Only in the fact that when there is a function that is presented ahead, there are increments that, from that particular point in time, which was propagated from, there will be effect back to the initial point of reference. That is the nature of the beast. As Preston spoke, once you have a reference,
Once you close the loop.
whether it be ahead or behind, that doesn't necessarily mean that that particular point in the future cannot be changed. Everything and nothing is possible. So
If there
along
were
those lines-
changes that were going on in the future, you can't really do much about that yourself, could you?
That's correct.
Could it be just like a projection or something, or not the real future? Some kind of condition
something-
thing on the mind?
To answer the question,
Mm-hmm.
Depending upon what realism set of functions, however they be real or manifested or surrealistic, depending what function and what time line, there are many timelines and functions of realism. Depending where you're going and where you attribute the point of reference, that determines how it will affect, as let's say you and I here, as to us here directly, the realistic point, how much that, let's say it's a manifested realism, that could have some effect here, but not that dramatically, as something, let's say, us sitting here 20 years ahead, that is in our space and framework and function of time, so that would affect us more dramatically than just something that was sort of created.
Okay, say that one psychic sets up a vortex to the future and we use that and then we shut that one down. If another psychic sets up a vortex to the future, will it go to the same future or can it go to a different one?
They go to wherever the function is generated to go to.
That's correct.
Okay.
There had to be people who were really controlling this very exactly and specifically.
Oh, yes.
Surely.
Very definitely.
Very much.
But what I'm saying is it'll go to a different place in time, but will it be on the same timeline, the same reality as the first psychic's vortex?
As long as it's before the most furthest point they projected
Okay.
ahead, yes, it will be. In fact, the government is using that today to, the existing time machines still flow in the Montauk line.
Okay,
It
now,
has to.
okay, once they have done that, can we go back in time and change the past to change the present, and then the future will be changed?
You already did it. With the loop
I
closed, everybody does automatically what they're supposed to do.
The
If
loop
you
has
from
been
the
closed
future-
once you've gone to the future.
Right.
So we don't have to worry about our present being changed now,
No, it can't be changed.
because we've already looped to the future through it.
And through the past.
Right.
If, let's say this is 83, let's say this is year 1, this is year 1000. And you go from 83 to year 1, from 83 to year, 2000. Anywhere between 2000 and 1, now you fed it back on itself. That means
So it's locked.
whatever the people do in here, they're going to do forever and ever. We're in an endless do loop in the computer right now.
What is the furthest forward anyone has traveled that you know of?
10,000.
So that's all locked through 10,000.
Unless the
Can you
vortex
describe
can be broken.
can you describe any recollection of anybody you know that has traveled that far into the future?
Nobody has ever gotten that far into the future and gotten into a real, almost like a running life situation, so we don't know what it is. As Duncan described, it always appears to be like a dream state where they hardly ever encounter any other people.
What about, all right, as far as going into the future and encountering people on Earth, okay? How far ahead is that?
Near term.
I believe they've gone about 10,000 years ahead.
But you still.
And encountered people.
No, what I'm saying is encountered something other than a dreamlike or a sublimated state. Interacted with it.
How far can you go and get a tangible, real future? Or can you do that?
No one's gotten a tangible, real future beyond 2012.
2012, 13, 14.
Somewhere in there.
Depends.
Does that indicate that maybe things have changed so radically at that time that there isn't anything else to see?
Something's happened.
There is a very, very abrupt wall there with nothing on the other side.
But the prophecies speak of the earth changes at those times.
Curious, isn't it?
Did
We're
you,
locked
in
through
your
to
travels, did you ever, Cameron, did you ever learn so much that for yourself it really was of value to you and not so much to others, but...
Okay, you have to realize the intelligence at the particular time. I now can sit here and speak of this in a matter-of-fact terms.
Right.
When the project having to do with out in Montauk was ongoing, I was very much not myself. In control of other, control of other people, functions, forms.
I mean, they control your...
I beg your pardon, that's
Right.
correct.
Right.
In the control of, I should say.
Uh-huh.
So I gained only what...
They wanted you to...
That's correct, basically.
Did they also deprive you of sleep and food and things like this to make you more malleable? Or?
No.
Simply...
Basically, that's sort of corny.
Right.
I don't mean to demean your question,
No, I understand.
but it was very elementary in the procedures that they did.
How long were you permitted to stay in the time period? Was it vary? Hours, minutes, seconds?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
If you were put into a time period, forward or back, okay?
How much
How
on our
long
clock?
were you permitted to stay there? How long would the vortex stay open?
As long as they ran the transmitter.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I mean, what was
sounds-
what was the mean time that someone would stay in the future? Minutes, seconds, days, hours?
I can't answer that.
Hard
That
to
question
say.
is not answerable, considering
I mean,
the
in your
format for which we're
perception of
traveling.
time, in your perception of
No,
time.
not
There is
his
no
perception.
there is no such
The people who were running it.
consideration of perception of time during that period. It's
There
very.
It wasn't a deal where they were told you got an hour to do the job, you gotta be back in an hour.
Does that mean that when you went back, for the people on this side, it appeared you just went in and came right back
Yeah.
out?
Yeah.
So,
Sure, basically.
So you
Yeah.
basically left and returned at the same time, no matter how much time you spent.
Mhm.
Some went
Sure.
out.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's true.
Yeah.
There were a few points where the thing glitched and you might have returned an hour later.
But
But it wasn't meant to.
basically, when you deal in the avenues of what Preston and Al call hyperspace, there is no such thing as time per se. It's in causality.
Right.
In theory and in function, you can return before you even start.
Right.
When they return you before you started, you don't remember what happened.
That
That's
Can
one
happen,
of
and
the
did
ways
happen.
they erase memories.
They did that intentionally. didn't
Yeah.
Very.
They have you do a job, go through the job, and then they return you to maybe milliseconds before you started. At that point, it becomes an isolated loop. You're detached from it. You can't even attach the Akashic record from that.
Incredible.
What was the shortest period of time that you know of someone traveling forward in time? Enough time to see himself coming through the vortex?
Okay, you're again asking Preston.
Okay.
He has information of such. I don't
Okay.
mean to demean your question.
I know that he has a lot of general information. You have specific information. So if anyone wants to answer that,
Mhm.
the shortest period of time, like for example, if there's seconds between the time you enter the vortex and the time you arrive, could you put yourself in the future? For example, could you put yourself in the future 20 seconds or a minute or 3 minutes and meet yourself?
Okay, what he's getting at is, can you project yourself, let's say 2 hours in the future, and then meet yourself 2 hours in the future.
Right.
Yes, you can. It's very dangerous.
Has it been done, to your knowledge?
No, it has not been done because when you walk through the tunnel, the way the tunnel was created, the person that walked in one end was out of phase with the person that walked out of the other end. And if he met himself, poof, was gone.
Like matter and antimatter?
Yeah,
Very much.
like, but not quite like that.
Okay, just to add to something, what Preston says, in theory, this is what happens. Indeed, it did happen.
It did happen.
Oh, sure. As a matter of test run and procedure.
And the person did not survive.
Oh, sure. It was literally just blown apart.
Yeah.
It just incinerated.
That's when they
To be
found
corny.
out that the transmitter did the phase reversal number. Still, they don't understand exactly what phase reversal it is. It's not normal phase reversal. It's
Cameron, if at a time you went into the future and you were in a point of danger, let's say in some situation you didn't expect, did you ever come across that sort of thing where, like that situation, right in the moment, whatever it was?
Well, on a metaphysical basis and theory, since I was educated in that sense, when you start moving through space and time, it is of necessity to start looking around and seeing what's going on, other than supposedly straight ahead. All different functions and violations of all sorts of things that go on.
You're breaking all sorts of laws.
Really?
Oh, sure.
Metaphysical laws.
To answer your question directly, though, I have passed myself in view, not made a connection of sort. You just don't do that.
Have you ever given anything to protect you against anything you would come across if it was a life and death situation? As people go into the jungles and they have weapons, let's say, or you're on a mission, you have weapons, but you would go into the future. If you met something and you were really in danger, what would you do if you didn't have a weapon of some sort? Did they give you? Did you carry such a thing?
Or would you have immediate access to the portal?
Okay, I think I
have
could
no-
answer that.
I have no
Just curious about it.
information on that.
I
I
think
can't
I
answer.
could answer that. First of all, they could design the vortex so it would follow him, and they could essentially view what's happening to him in the future.
Oh, they were viewing you
That
also.
means this I do remember. I'm sorry. This I know happened. That they could follow the person in the future or the past. Anything dangerous start to happen, they just bring them back automatically. It was like a mission control where there was a group of people watching what went on, and they were able to talk to him. He could talk back to them. You know, that they had set up so that when they speak into a mic on the station, he could hear it. Of course, they hear what he says through the speakers on the station, and had a whole monitoring setup operational. And they also had the capability with the transmitter to run the vortex right over him and pull him back without him walking in it. They walk the vortex to him. If he started to encounter anything dangerous, zoop, he'd be pulled back and he'd be out of it.
Excuse me, put me down if I'm jumping ahead, but was the vortex, as many of us have read, first opened with the Philadelphia experiment in 1942-43?
Yes.
Are you going to be talking about that later?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, we will be. As soon as we can get over this hurdle here.
Right.
hurdle, you know?
That's a good size one.
Very fascinating.
Also, because I remember hearing that lecture when you first talked about it, the circumstances by which this project was cancelled in such a...
But we haven't got that
in a
far
panic
yet.
situation.
Yeah.
No, I know.
We haven't got that far. Let's at this point continue. We can.
Well, I got a related question real quick, when you went into the future and saw the horse, was that by any chance something to scare you into agreeing to do what they wanted to prevent something, or?
It was more of a view, just to consider indeed what was there and critique.
Yep.
So they really wanted to know something.
Like a reference point.
Yeah, a test is
It was a test, basically.
We're all getting the same answer.
They wanted to see if
Quiz,
everybody
Cameron.
came back with basically the same view, the same information. Test your powers of observation, whatever.
Okay.
What did you see? Describe it in detail. Not only the horse, but the surrounding city that was in ruins. Well, do you have any ideas why? Did you see anybody there? Did you see anything else?
So,
Et cetera, et cetera.
when you would go through the vortex, if you were to go through right now, you disappear from this spot?
Yes,
Oh, yes.
very definitely.
You wouldn't be here.
I got you.
You'd just be on the viewers.
Right.
All right. Let's continue.
One more question. Could this system of the vortex without the technological trappings, but have been something similar to how Nostradamus or the prophets or whatever were supposed to see the future?
Who knows?
I mean,
That's
speculating.
totally unknown.
I assume movies were sometimes taken in the past.
Well, movies can be made right off the viewers.
Oh, really?
They could do
Yeah.
that off the viewer?
Sure.
Like,
The viewer was a video signal. You put the viewer right onto a videotape machine.
Wow.
what kind of files must they have somewhere on all
You must have
Yes,
some great home
good
movies.
question. What kind
Somebody
of
else
file?
see home movies. All right.
Home movies.
home movies? Yeah. A good
Oh,
one.
what a
Good stuff.
file of home movies.
Sounds like a
right?
title for a sci-fi movie about this.
And question would be here, do you have any of these tapes? No.
No.
Yeah.
They were closely guarded. I know the tapes were made because I saw them, but they were closely guarded.
You saw the tape?
Well, I have to admit, I think I have to admit at this point, I was there too.
Sounds like
I was the guy that built the transmitter. You know, rebuilt the transmitter.
That's
See, they did the number on me where I would go to work. And then I would be taken out to Montauk. I'd do 10 hours work, then they would bring me back, run me back to millisecond or so before I left, and I never knew what happened. I had to reference to that period to pull my memories. And I have done it. I pulled most of the memories. That's how I can talk of the viewer. I was the one that designed and built the viewer. Of course, I had tremendous facilities behind me to do it. I
And
can't do it
staff
today.
and information
Right.
and
not
computers
like the
and
garage.
No, not like my garage.
No.
educators.
To continue, all right, they got the working time portal, the working time vortex. Somebody on the station realized, hey, we're headed for a mess. We gotta stop this thing. Just like in the old movie Donovan's Brain. What was done was in one of these chair subjects' minds, there was a little thought implanted that you're going to pull a monster out of the id, a monster out of the subconscious, and transmit it through the transmitter on site. And the person went in, lay down in the chair, went into this thing, and there was no one else in the room, which happened every once in a blue moon, but it did happen. This person snuck in and said, okay, the time is now, whatever the key word was. At that point, the person unleashed through the transmitter the form, and the transmitter precipitated this huge, big, black, hairy thing that was hungry. It ate everything in sight, buildings, people, ground, and they went into a panic when they couldn't control this thing and stop it. Pruitt says, shut the transmitter off. They go down to the power station, shut down the generators, throw the switches, freaking thing didn't stop. Kept going. It was still hungry and still eating.
This is on the base?
Yeah, on the base.
actually we're eating people and
Yep.
machinery and everything.
Yep.
And smashing everything you could
And
get
buildings.
to the site.
How big was this
Buildings.
About 30 foot tall.
Storage barrier.
Solid or?
Yeah, it was solid. Sure. The transmitter had the capability to precipitate the
Right.
thing. We knew at that point the transmitter could do it. And finally, Pruitt said, okay, he's got to go up and cut the wires that come out of the ground into the radar building. They cut those wires. He figured maybe there was wires got miswired on the ground and was getting power from somewhere besides the generator's house. Cut the wires. Freaking thing still continued to work. And then they kept going. They cut the wires inside the building. Freaking thing continued to work. No one could walk upstairs at that point. The energy was so heavy you couldn't even get above the first floor. They tried cutting everything to the first floor to shut this freaking thing off. Now, to try to go ahead a little, what had actually happened is they had made a connection on that day that Junior was released with the Philadelphia experiment. Somebody had to go shut off the Philadelphia generators. You know, I will go into that. That's that's his field of expertise. When the generators are shut off on the Eldridge, then Pruitt was able to take acetylene torches and go up and cut the transmitter apart in Montauk. You go out to this day, you'll see where there's acetylene torch marks and everything on the equipment.
You can go on the base now?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, it's wide open.
This was in 83.
Yeah, 83, August 12, 1983. Okay, at that point, anyone that was left, they dragged into a site that we won't disclose at this point and did the total brainwashing number on. So you didn't remember a thing. All of us sitting here were brainwashed, so we didn't remember anything. Except that he found his way to my place. And that's when the deprogramming started.
You're one of the two you spoke of on the tape? Or somebody who came to your house to tell you about what happened? Or were you speaking to Cameron or Al?
Cameron.
Okay.
How did you happen to go to Preston's place, Cameron? Instinct?
Directed or instinct or perchance, it's hard to say. There's a story that goes along with it. It's sort of long and bulky, but somehow it comes up that indeed I was directed to, still under influence and command, so to speak, to disrupt Preston and his work.
At that point, they were getting worried about me because I was starting to stumble into Montauk in real life.
You were remembering things, or you were just,
Well,
you had occasion to go
over
there?
the years, one of the problems with this thing that they set up, although you don't remember any of the work you did, little bits and pieces of it filter through, I developed a huge interest in esoteric technology, psychotronics, psychic activity. I was researching this to the nth degree. I had a team of psychics working with me. We were trying to figure out what was the energy form and all this stuff. I knew in the mid-'70s there was a source of psychic interference here on Long Island. And after a couple of years, I was able to trace it right out to Montauk. So I had my eye on Montauk for years. Of course, I could never get on there. The security was thick. Although it was a derelict base, there was security guards all over the place. And all I know is a friend of mine from out east calls me up and says, Preston, the old Montauk Air Base is wide open. When do you want to go look? I said, tomorrow. And I was out there that morning with my friend. We walked all around. First thing, when military pulls out of a base, what do? They clean everything up. They take everything with them. There was junk strewn over the whole base. There were files dumped out of a file cabinet just filling one room in the big building, the floor of one room. Equipment was still left. Power was still on in sections of the base. You had to flip switches and the lights would come on.
Where are these people gone?
They just fled, zoom.
Because they were scared of this creature?
Yeah.
Fled in utter panic.
Right.
What happened with the monster?
That's real responsible military for you.
When the transmitter was shut off, was finally cut apart, the monster stopped animation and over a period of days just faded back into hyperspace. See, all these things were active, tunnels, creations, whatever, as long as that transmitter was functioning. Either it got power from the site or it got power from the Eldridge. It didn't matter where it got its power from.
What happened to this person who created this id or whatever? Is that one of you?
I don't know if these guys want to say.
Well, information, there is a photograph that was taken just in routine basis out in Montauk that was presented in the first lecture, Preston in 85, 6. Chicago, was it?
Yeah.
USPA conference. There were random photos taken, and one of the gentlemen from SITU, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does that stand for?
Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained.
He looked at a photograph and said there's something there unusual. There was a blow-up of it, and there was a sort of what's been categorized as sort of like a Bigfoot. What I see on that is myself, as an image of myself riding the back of it.
And that identifies where it came from.
How much, I'm very startled with the photograph for sure. It does seem to have a connection with me, even though I try to discredit it.
Is this in one of these slides? One of these ones?
Oh, no.
It's there. It's
Is it?
It's in the collection of slides.
Ah,
It's in
I
the
beg your
slides. Very small.
So it was still
This
like
would
a
be very
faint
similar.
image or something.
Right, a faint image.
So this would be very similar to the quote-unquote it or the shadow or whatever
yeah, could probably be.
psychological technique you want to use.
Yeah, just an add-on here. Preston spoke of a 30-foot type creature. There are a number of images associated. 30 feet is by all means could very well be correct. 9 feet, 10 feet, depending which image is considered.
Also, perhaps, how scared the individual was who saw it.
Well,
mean,
some
these
of the
tails
marks-
grow.
Some of the marks on the buildings are up quite high. It
Yeah,
had to be like 30,
There's
it
at
had to be at least
15.
25 feet
I would say
On the
it's at least
outside or
15,
inside?
probably more.
outside.
So
They're
does
still
it mean
visible?
it got outside and it was attacking the building from the outside?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
It was rolling free.
Was it like a monkey type big, like King Kong?
It was very
Or-
similar
or
in
like
appearance to one of the Bigfoot,
Bigfoot,
which you showed them. I've seen pictures of, I'm sure, at various times
but
and places.
huge.
Mm-hmm.
But huge. Instead of being 7 foot, it was perhaps closer to 30. My original impression was, when I first went on the base, it was perhaps 30 foot high.
Now, to the best of your knowledge, how was this creature created yet? Was there some kind of someone decided
It was
this was
him.
to be created?
Yeah, some person, we're not sure who it was at this point, felt like the rest of us here that this was going too far, it was getting dangerous, and there was going to be problems in the future. It had to be brought to a stop. The project had to be crashed. And the most effective way to crash it was to make something
Program
hungry that would
creation of a
cause them
creature.
to panic. Throw them into a
Information,
panic.
information that someone was tapped on the shoulder somehow and did some business to do this. Some information was passed along.
You wonder if you worked there at all or not, but you have been living with your folks for a long time. Don't they know? Did you ever ask them what you were doing in these time
He
periods?
had no time loss. They returned
They
him
returned
immediately
before it
after.
Just before it happened.
Yeah.
Before it happened. So he was never gone. Even though he could have been out looking for himself
I
during
came
that time,
home
he was
from
not
work.
gone.
So freaking tired.
I do.
So you essentially lived a couple of years in 1 year.
Yeah,
How do you
Right.
make a living
I went
normally?
through the
I
same
mean, let's
thing.
say outside of this project.
as a microwave engineer.
And you're still getting a check,
Oh, yeah.
and paycheck or whatever.
I
you
come
want.
home from work. I felt like I'd worked 20 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours,
Probably
anywhere in there.
worked even more.
And since about 83, I haven't had that. Since 83, I've been fine. But from about 75 until 83, God, was I tired. But I wouldn't remember any of it because they would bring me back to milliseconds before I left and it'd be a closed loop. But the experience and the education would come through. That's why I went into metaphysics. Because this other project, I was heavily in metaphysics. Originally, before that, I was a nuts and bolts electronics type person. I didn't even metaphysics. That was my reaction.
Yeah.
But
This is for idiots type
yeah,
thing.
but because I'd done so much in this other function, it's still enough filtered through that I developed an interest in this, what you
Right.
want to call this life, if you want to say, of metaphysics. And that was their downfall. Because it was that made me conscious of what was going on, that Montauk was the source of these interfering signals. Of course they were interfering signals. They were following up my research in no end.
Was there any sense of all the experiences that you were doing, going into the future, etc., and all of that, that there was some real higher force around? There was a higher force that existed who sort of was more in control than the people were at the station. People have their little kingdoms and they think that they rule the world in a sense, but as you were going through the experience, you sensed higher forces, much higher forces that really had something to do to say about destiny and how things go on this planet.
Alan,
Very
would you care to answer that?
mystical experience is what I'm saying.
Well, since Duncan is deferring to me on that one, I'll try to answer it. I would say that during that period itself, looking back on it, there was no awareness on my part, and I don't think there was any on Duncan's part, of such a higher agency, if you will, directing our efforts at that point. I would say very definitely there was before that point, and at some time in the past we were aware of it, though perhaps not in our respective earlier lifetimes, of this lifetime, but further back.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, very definitely, that there's some kind of, if you will pardon the expression, a divine plan involved in this whole thing, which is very, very difficult to explain, is very difficult to extrapolate on. There was a reason for all of this happening. I know that without any question. What that reason is still not clear. And I think Duncan would agree that yes, he knows that there was some kind of a reason for it. Preston would probably agree with it, and he's looking at it from the mathematical, the nuts and bolts end of it to try and come up with a reason. And it's not easy. Yes, there was a reason why it happened. If you go back into, as I will shortly, go back into the Philadelphia experiment end of it, which was the beginning of the whole business, one can see from the way that thing was maneuvered that there was a higher hand of some kind involved in setting the whole thing up, because it would never have happened the way it did unless two obscure dates, 40 years apart, coincided with two experiments.
If I could just add something directly to your question, quickly. Having to do a scene and knowing possibly some other intelligentsia. There's a function of the time tunnel where a person, or in my experience per se, it's the only thing I can relate to, when a person moves through a number of procedures, there's a point in maybe 2/3 down the tunnel as perceived, where there's a very big thump. The energy leaves the body. There's a tendency to see on a broad scale. I can only answer that question theoretically. Looking back on it, I'm sure there is and there was some intelligence there, certainly higher form than we know. As to the recognition of it, I would have trouble in that sense. But there is what I call a full out, where the energy leaves the body, and there's a tendency to see on a very broad scale. That's partially what they were trying to do at Montauk, is to stabilize and to freeze what I call a full out, the seeing process.
They didn't want you to see it, is that what you're saying?
No, they were trying to manifest that.
Oh, they were.
For whatever their purposes.
And in your travels, did you ever go back in time and see other of your own lifetimes? Did they ever ask you to do that?
No.
Because it would seem to me that you could do that. But
You could, but it would be
theoretically.
Yeah, it wouldn't be in their interest.
No, but I just wondered if they ever asked you to.
I have no information directly, but theoretically it's very possible to influence a person's function, however, back so far.
What was the role of the aliens at all? I mean, other than the chair, which they had
Okay,
given them.
that would be the earlier part of this that we haven't got into yet. Let's look at another little sideline here. What was done, one of the cute little trips that they made was they made a trip from 83 back to 63 and installed him in a new body. That's all I knew of it, that they installed him in a new body. I don't know why, but Al could, of course, tell us why. This is my Dodge Caravan before the front got broken. Backed up to the main door in the back of the big building. This is the main radar building. This really, we should go to this picture later. That's essentially what it is.
All I know is what I got here. I don't know what the deal is.
All right, let's go to the next picture. It's out of focus. This is leaving the site. Of course, there's my car again. And the red building is one of the old leftover radar buildings that they didn't use. The round things, we don't know what the hell the round things were. And this is the street coming out.
Okay.
That's the back end of the main antenna. This thing is an antenna which is roughly 300 foot by 200 foot. And that tower that goes this way, the game horn is mounted on. That's the omnidirectional antenna. And the little thing on top, that's shaped like that, is the IFF antenna.
What's
They
this
didn't
radar
use the
used for? Is this for the project?
Yeah, this is
the transmitter?
This is the transmitter. You're looking at the transmitter. In fact, anyone that has any sensitivities, this is a full shot of the building. Anybody that has any sensitivity can probably feel the energies coming off this picture.
What is it?
This is a fallen tower or
Do
what?
we have a
That's an
pointer?
extra tower.
Filippo, do we have a pointer for him so he doesn't have to pointer, something, a stick or something?
Oh, yes, we have a poker.
Okay.
Here it is, well, when the pointer comes. This is gonna be a riot, using a fireplace poker. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 floors in this structure. Each one is about 100 foot square.
This is the transmitter?
This is the transmitter building. Transmitter was on this floor, and this floor, and this was the antenna controller. All these ducts here are cooling for the transmitter.
That's just sitting there open?
Yep,
They're looking for a lawsuit.
yep.
Go ahead.
This is another picture, another site, another picture of the building with the antenna. Again, you can see doors you can look out. This is all open. We know it was open as of September.
You can walk inside the building.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
This is a shot.
Alternate reality.
This is just essentially background. Let's keep going. This is another one of those round structures. What they did with these in the project, if anything, we don't know, and they didn't look maintained. You can see it's all rusted over here, and, here, and, but you can see that other building was maintained. This was like about 85, these pictures were taken. Okay. This is a shot from the roof looking up at the antenna. This is a catwalk. People walk here. You can get an idea of the massive size of this thing.
This is the antenna?
This is the antenna, transmitting antenna. This is shot out over, that's the ocean, from the roof of the building.
Okay. Don't change it here.
This is the group. This person should be familiar. That person should be familiar. This is my friend Jeff that comes up from Maryland. That's the guy that plays Rambo running around the woods.
Now those buildings in the back?
That's two of those round buildings. You can see they haven't been maintained. Look at the doors here.
Yeah.
Did you go inside of them?
Yeah.
And you couldn't tell what it was all about?
There isn't anything in them. Nothing in them. Those are cleaned out.
And those buildings you can still walk in now?
If they haven't boarded up, sure. I don't know. This is a picture of what they call the omnidirectional antenna. This is what the antenna they use. In fact, if you look, you see all the wires feeding in, all the coax cables feeding in. This they use to send out a signal, but we believe they use this more for picking up signals. This would pick up a return from the person that they were targeting. Because it has one huge cable that goes up to it and a bunch of little cables for receivers. And they control the different dipoles on this. Okay, let's go. This is a general shot of the antenna. That's the gain horn. See, they were first focusing this so the signal will go in, bounce off, come out. But they finally realized that they didn't want the Hertzian component to reflect it, so they positioned it so the gain horn pointed right at the subject. That's the way they eventually developed this thing so it worked right.
Outside.
Outside,
The
yeah.
subject was outside.
The subject was in another building that was downrange.
The focal point was at that building.
Yeah. This is a distance view of the thing. You can get an idea how massive it is.
What are these dimensions approximate?
300 feet by 200, 150 feet. 100 feet this
125
way.
tons for the antenna and 125 tons for the control mechanism on the roof.
That's the pedestal here.
125 tons each.
This weighs 125 tons, and this is about 200 tons.
Did you help design this transmission antenna?
No, that was part of the SAGE.
Okay.
The white dot shot. But this is interesting. This is essentially the main building. This is the transmitter building. This is the control center where all the computers were, and this was offices.
Where was the subject?
Down the hill that way.
Okay, in another building, yeah.
Now those buildings are still there. Are they
Oh, yes.
open?
This one is open. I'm told this one is open, and this one is open, and the powerhouse is open.
This is a distance shot. You're 2 miles away here from the building. Montauk Highway. Same thing. You're 2 miles away here. I don't know what that is. Oh yeah, you're further away. This is now this is in the town still. This is like about 5 miles away here. That's the building.
And no telephone.
What about this camera?
This building here is where they had the subject. This is how many people know what the planetary grid is?
I know.
Yeah.
This is one of the cross points of the grid.
Wow.
You stand here, you'll feel the grid.
And it's still there.
Yep.
That plot of land.
And if we have the right picture, you'll see they arranged the buildings around the cross point like the Indians arrange mounds of rock around the cross points. These buildings tune the cross point. But they focused it, if I remember, on that building, was where they had the subject. You know, these buildings are Duncan verified it. That's where he was.
Okay.
Duncan has a tendency to flip when he sees stuff like this. Okay, let's go to the next one. That's me. Standing next to the radar site 5 miles away. And you see my welding glasses.
Yes.
Another shot. You can go on. That's extraneous.
Do these power lines go straight to that
Yep.
location?
They go straight to that
And all they
location.
are is to carry
Those high tension.
Wow.
Right here, you can see the high tension lines.
Are they still active?
Oh yeah. Those are what supply the point. Okay.
I mean, are they active?
Here's a picture of the pedestal. These are motors. 4 of them. The motors are gone today.
This is on the roof.
This is on the
Okay.
roof.
Motors are gone?
Yeah, someone took the motors. How? I don't know.
And how they got them down, right?
Oh, that's on
If
top
they
of
pushed
the
them off and let them crash, there'd be big crevices in the ground, but we didn't heard of any crevices. Train freaks may have taken these, but these are the same motors that run the big locomotives.
Mm.
This is a picture of the gain horn. This is the thing, this is about the size of my Volkswagen Rabbit at the time. This is what actually sent the signal out. It went out like this. More weight guy went down the catwalk and went into the building.
We're looking at it sideways.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, there's the UFO landing pad.
That was a landing pad, right?
What is that?
That's the only one of these round little buildings that's maintained.
Oh, right.
Where's the paint building?
Okay, that's an old radar building that wasn't maintained. This is the main operations center. This is where they had all the computers. And the chair was right below this building, we figure. And then that's the office building there. That's where Jack Pruitt and what's his
Now,
face?
which building was the subject in? Can we see it there?
Huh?
Can we see the building the subject was in from here?
No.
Okay.
Another same area, essentially. But you notice these are not maintained. This one's nicely maintained.
Mm-hmm.
Some people believe thoroughly that they landed UFOs here. This is a shot of the lighthouse from the roof.
Well, the lighthouse isn't far away.
No.
Wow.
One of those two little
Buildings?
Maintenance buildings of some
these are
sort.
maintenance buildings.
I don't think they've been used in years and years.
That's the same.
That's the red radar site. They had a big bubble on top of that at one time, but hasn't been there for years. Same shot, just different lens.
This base had been constructed in World War II or something like that?
No, after the 50s. Looks like we just had that shot.
No, this is the view of.
It's still
Yeah.
there.
He took a lot of shots.
Yes, Jan took tons of shots.
What is this?
That is what's left of the old Fort Hero. There was gun emplacements in there. There's a emergency generator in that building now. Or there was. Closest I could figure from the wiring.
Where were the 4 megawatt generators in the
You'll see
trunk there?
No, you'll see him. Go on. That's another shot of the red building.
Why a pink building? Which was the building where there were marks, you say, on the walls?
Well, we
All of them. I don't know if we got good enough detail to see him. I don't know why you took a shot at that, but
You got,
okay, you liked it.
show me what you got here.
Same thing.
Yeah. Now, gotta go in a distance. Or
I think the screen's
That's the
okay.
Mont Bell Tower. He took a shot at that too.
all right, Filippo.
He took a shot of that one.
Okay.
The Mont Bell building, of course, is at the base of it. Something new and different. I never understood why. Oh yeah, this is a maintenance shed. This is the diesel tank that ran the generators. Okay, there's the building that the subject was in, from the roof. There's the cross point, and there's the tuning buildings around the cross point. The government built this, and the state, this is a state park today, the state's been told they cannot tear these buildings down.
Oh, really?
Yep,
They cannot what?
they cannot tear these buildings down.
Are they being maintained? Can you still get in them? What?
I don't know.
You didn't try to.
Can you go inside those?
I've been in the buildings, but I don't know if they're open.
when you're in it, psychically?
Oh yeah, even I can pick it up, and I have the sensitivity of
You
a
can
rock.
just drive there and walk into those buildings.
Well, you drive in the parking lot of Montauk Point State Park and then walk back.
Now, is
About
that
a 2
gate
mile
there?
walk.
Is that the gate
2 mile
separating the
walk.
state park from the?
This is just pipes going over the buildings,
Okay, but
over the walkway.
you can't drive there.
No, you can't
through-
drive up here. They got gates that are closed.
Okay, okay.
But you can walk in and around and you can get there.
I saw cars there when you were there.
Well, we had their permission to be in there to take pictures and stuff like that. This is just another shot of over there. You can see how far away they were focusing, and they were focusing right on this building
Yeah.
here. It was right in line of sight.
But you can't drive into the main base.
No,
park.
not now.
No,
No.
you just gotta walk
You,
through.
you gotta walk in.
That's a long walk. Yeah, especially on a cold day.
Yeah.
You have permission, when did you go with the cars?
This was May
May of 86.
When it was warm?
86. Yeah.
May of 86?
Yeah.
You have a letter?
Yeah, we had a letter.
Is that letter no good now?
No, it's not any good now.
What is that tank?
This is the diesel fuel tank that ran the generator station.
Okay.
Oh, I don't know why you took a picture of that. Except you can see again the building where the subject was of the early experiments. Same thing. There's the building again.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Let's keep going. There's the powerhouse. This thing has 4 huge diesel generators, and you can see the cooling towers for each. They used 2, they had one ready to go, and one was being repaired.
How big were those things, would you say?
Megawatt.
I mean, how physically, how big? How long? High?
Size of a locomotive. They were locomotive engines, essentially.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, if the power went out coming in on those trunk lines, though, that wouldn't be enough power to power this
Well,
vortex,
they
would it?
originally used this to run the station, but what happened, they discovered when they turned on, it created such time disturbances, it gave the generators the heebie-jeebies and they went down. So they put the generators down permanently and ran off a loco.
Right.
But the generators had the heebie-jeebies. This is another shot of the power station.
Oh, you were really in there.
Yep. Another shot over, I think this is the bay between the ports. Same thing.
Where the antenna is?
That's one part of the antenna.
I don't know if this is, I got this right.
That's a shot of that other gantry from the roof. You saw that thing next to my car.
Yeah.
You see, that hasn't been maintained either.
Do I have it right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it
There's
down?
stuff strewn all over this base.
Now, are you saying that this 30-foot creature was doing stuff to things like this, or no?
Yeah, we think that was part of it.
Ripped it off, you mean?
If I see anything that's obvious, I'll let you know.
Oh, no, there's not a whole lot more here. Yeah. There's a lot of duplicates that I didn't use.
No, that's nothing. You've seen that.
Now we go inside.
Yeah, okay. That's a choke. That's a charging reactor.
Can you focus that a little better?
Could you speak a little louder, please? Preston?
This is what they call a charging choke. This is a filter choke, I'm sorry. The rectifiers are up in there. They had big multi-disc rectifiers up in there. You know, what I call hockey pucks. Huh?
What type of material are they using to rectify something like
Silicon.
Yeah, solid state silicon.
I call them hockey pucks.
Silicon or selenium?
Silicon. I call them hockey pucks. This is one of the power tubes. This is called an amplitron. That's the tube right there. And those are the magnets for it. And the pulse transformer is in this oil-filled tank. And this crane lifts this thing out.
How
And
big
this
is that
other-
diameter
3 foot.
on the anode?
3 foot.
Is this part of the equipment that was, that had to be destroyed, or is it just?
No, they left this behind. Let's go on. This is a tube fully assembled with all the magnets on it. This thing is about 6 foot tall from here to here.
Preston, that would never be used for radar, is that correct?
They originally used it for radar. This was long distance radar.
Uh-huh.
But then they rebuilt them. Another shot of the amplitron. I never noticed a red floor before. Is Al here?
Yeah, I'm here.
You ever notice a red floor?
No.
Something funny going on.
When we were in there, part of it was red. And I don't recall what parts.
This is a close-up of the amplitron.
When you look at the walls in the back of that, you can see the marks.
It just depends on what's equipment. It's very unusual.
This is some of the acetylene torch marks where they cut the waveguides to stop it. This is the power transformer. This thing probably is about 12 tons. This is the type of thing that I tell Duncan move. He grunts, he groans a little, and he moves it.
Mungo like beans.
Yeah. This is a Thyrotron. This is the main pulse modulator. They use 4 of these things. This is about 2.5 foot tall, this tube. And about 6 inches in diameter. Wow. And they had 4 of these in parallel to fire off the pulse forming network.
Now, that wasn't just sitting there, was it?
Yeah.
I hope you got it.
Yes.
Oh, good.
Well, this is one of the ones that's broken. I got complete ones, good ones.
These were made in the 50s?
These particular ones were made in the 80s.
Wow.
But they were designed in the 50s. That's 500 Gauss magnet. That's the plate on one of the magnets. You can go on. That doesn't mean a hell of a lot.
Except for the stamp Sperry on it.
Yeah, much else, except for...
I don't know what that is.
Anyway, that's it.
Wonder where the collapsed building is.
What?
Wonder where the collapsed building is.
It might have been in some of the others. I got some more here if you want to run through them.
It's up to you guys.
They're all
If you
duplicates.
want to run through quick, go ahead.
I didn't see it, Preston, the duplicate.
They're all duplicates.
There was also better pictures showing the torch marks.
Could be. I'll do it if you want. Okay.
It's up to you guys.
No, let's do it. Whatever.
If you want to do it, you can
Tell
go
me
through
what's
them quick.
the deal.
That same thing. Go on.
Zip through fast.
I'm good at this.
Another shot of the portal, of the vortex,
Another portal.
of the cross point. I'm sorry. Same thing.
Didn't see you stopping from running a power line
Okay.
on top of it.
Can you back up one?
Yeah.
back up to what you had there, please, before.
In here, right?
Between that one, it's a different time period of the day. The
Right.
energetics of that picture as opposed to the next one is very different.
Maybe another sensor can pick that up.
As in higher or lower, or better, worse, or just different?
These are at random now.
Whoops.
Another picture of the magnetron.
Okay.
I mean, the
There's gonna be a lot of
Amplitron.
them.
Yeah, I know. Jan took
Oh,
loads of those.
Do what you want. These are
Same
very
thing.
different.
Same thing. Go on. Go on.
Going as fast as you can.
Especially he's got it loaded.
I know.
Oh.
That's another
If
shot of
there's
the
any
power
more welding
source.
shots that you see.
Those insulators.
No.
Big?
Well, this thing provided 20 kV. Another shot. That's the same thing. Go on.
There's the torch marks, which are not as clear.
Yeah.
No.
Same thing. Go on. You say there's lots of those.
Okay. It's gonna jump outside.
Okay, this is a closer shot of the antenna, but not close enough. You can see all the cables going in this
Yeah.
box on the bottom. They're doing phased array work with this thing. You see cables running up it. These are driving. This is a series of dipoles. He's got a close up of this somewhere in there.
This is an over the horizon radar.
Yes,
isn't
it is. That doesn't matter. That's all fuzzed out. I guess you also picked up the bad ones.
Well, I told you I took them out, but you want to see those.
Same thing. Keep going. Oh, we can run them quick.
As best I can.
Yep. That's a dud.
Yeah, back inside.
This is better than walking through the place.
It's better.
That's the burning?
Yeah, that's the burning.
Outside again, is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. That's the gain horn.
And these are of no value to them now, to use somewhere else.
Well, I'm sure they're valuable.
Sure they are.
Of course, more to transport than.
No, then build it, besides, put somebody back in business, right?
That's the cop's car.
You come out to see what you were doing?
Yeah. Cop came in and looked in every couple of hours.
Really?
It's a shot of the whole town, like. That's Port Hero right there.
Nice.
We had a permit to get in there.
Yeah.
A day permit.
Another shot of the antenna. Let's keep
How
going.
difficult is it to get a permit?
Very.
How'd you
The
manage?
fellow got it through the alleged connection to the senator. Continue. That's another Amplitron. Another one. Continue. You can tell when they left. They took off in a hurry. You can see this junk strewn everywhere. The military doesn't leave it like this.
How many of those tubes were there?
2.
Two. What did they? Yeah, I got the.
You can continue. That's the same thing. It's another shot.
That's welding torch up there?
Yeah. There's 2 big ones. Big
Well,
one here.
what
You
was-
notice they're always where this would turn and go up.
What were they cutting at? Was there something coming out of the wall?
Yes.
Go
The
up?
weight guide went up like this. This thing was quite
I
disassembled.
wouldn't cut that. I wouldn't cut that thing running. I wouldn't want an open waveguide.
I wouldn't either.
How?
I wouldn't.
Ooh.
Another shot of the tube. I can assure you I didn't cut it apart. Another shot of the tube. Big
They
deal.
probably ordered some private to do it who didn't know what
What
was
if
going
things
on.
like this
No,
cost?
Pruitt himself did. Huh?
Cut
Who
that
did?
off.
Pruitt himself did that?
Pruitt himself cut it apart.
Jeez, he must have been desperate.
What would a tube like this cost?
This is a
one.
C23J, which today is about $4,500. Another shot of the Amplitron.
The Amplitrons are a little more expensive.
Yes. The Amplitron is worth about $250,000.
Each one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another shot of the Amplitron. We can go on.
Much more. The Amplitron here.
It even had a built-in vacuum pump, which you can see here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Hmm?
Okay.
Okay. on this.
Project which started this whole business off, so far as I can determine. That was the infamous Philadelphia experiment, so-called because in its final phases was conducted in the harbor outside the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It originally began back, I'll condense this quite a bit, it originally began back in the 30s in Chicago with three people, Dr. John Hutchinson Sr., who was the dean of the University of Chicago, Nikola Tesla, and a third man by the name of Dr. Kurtenauer, who was an Austrian physicist who was apparently on staff at the University of Chicago. They decided about that time to try and do something about all of the speculation rampant at that time and for years prior about things like invisibility and how could you possibly make an object invisible and so on. They got together and researched the thing and did some work at the University of Chicago around 31, 32. In 33, the Institute of Advanced Studies at Princeton, New Jersey was formed. And the project was transferred there probably about 34. Now, one of the first people on staff at the University Institute of Advanced Studies was Dr. John Eric von Neumann, who is from Hungary, Budapest. He had his degree about 1925 in chemistry and 26 in physics, PhD in math. Taught in Europe for about 4 years and transferred to the United States. He taught at the graduate school at Princeton for 3 years and was invited to join the Institute. Other people at the Institute, of course, included Albert Einstein, who left Germany in 1930, went to the California Institute of Technology for 3 years, taught there, then went to the Institute upon their invitation and acceptance. A lot of other people showed up there as time went on. But the project expanded about 1936. In the meantime, of course, Tesla was named as director of the project because he was a very good friend of a certain gentleman in the White House known as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who he had originally met in 1917 when Roosevelt was the Secretary of the Navy, and Tesla was asked at that time to do some work for the government, for the war effort, which he did. And they maintained their friendship. When he became president, Roosevelt, insofar as I can determine, called him down to Washington and asked him, well, how would you like to work for the government again? And since he was not terribly flush with money at that time, namely Tesla wasn't, he accepted, became involved with this project insofar as being the director was concerned. He had already been involved. And he became and retained his position as director of the so-called Invisibility Project until he resigned or left. However, it occurred in 1942. 1936, with their studies in the labs there, they decided to have some kind of an early test. They had partial results, which means they had partial invisibility. The Navy was encouraged, everybody was encouraged to continue. And of course, the Navy had been funding it almost from the beginning in terms of doing things like giving them little research money and grants and that sort of thing. It progressed onward until 1940, and I'll get a little bit out of sequence here, but in 1940, after further research and with Tesla's approach, they decided they were ready for a full test. And they had a small Navy ship, probably a tender, and two adjacent vehicles, Brooklyn Navy Yard. And the two adjacent vehicles provided the power and the basic drives for the coils and the equipment they had on board the tender, with cables from either side. And the idea being, if they're in the area of the Brooklyn Navy Yard with the cables, if something went wrong, they could cut the cables, and if they got desperate, they could sink the ship. Well, nothing of the kind happened. Everything worked, and the project was declared completely successful. But the important point of that 1940 test was there was no one on board the test vehicle. It was strictly a dry run, no people, no personnel. It's important because of what happened later. Now, in the meantime, other people came on board. There was a Dr. Gustav Le Bon, a associate of Van Neumann's, who became a close associate. There was a Dr. Clarkson, came in about 1940. Additionally, also came a T. Townsend Brown, who had had a strange history I won't go into. But he was joined the Naval Reserve about 1933, and about 1939 he was tapped on the shoulder for active service by the Navy, and they wanted him specifically because of his background in gravity, gravitics, high voltage and such, to work on the problem of the German magnetic mines. He was given the status of the head of a department to develop countermeasures for the German magnetic mines and other mines, minesweeper operations for the Navy. That became important because this led into a parallel project, the degaussing project of the Navy, where they developed the so-called degaussing cables to explode the magnetic mines at a distance quite safe, quite far away from the ship. Normally they'd be triggered by the magnetic flux of the ship's general mass, which would concentrate flux lines at a certain point that would trip the mechanism, and of course, ideally the magnetic mine would be tripped under the hull and of course below the ship to Kingdom Come. If you provided a strong, powerful magnetic field, it would trip the mine's sensing mechanisms at a safe distance and would be harmlessly exploded. That project was actually separate from the invisibility project, but was also parallel in the sense that much of the same technology was involved. Now, I became involved with this thing. I'll have to go into a little bit of a personal history. We'll again try to condense it because we are, I think, running a little late, but whatever. Quite aside from my legal name, which is on my birth certificate of Bielik, I was born in 1916, the best that I've been able to determine from my own memories and what comes up. 4 August 1916. I was born Edward A. Cameron, and in 1917, I believe 15 May, this guy was born in his original body, Duncan Cameron, or whatever they called him at the time. And we were born into a family with considerable amounts of money, not really wealthy, but they were well off. And we didn't hurt for money, we didn't hurt for the means for an education. Came time we went to school, he wound up in the University of Edinburgh, Scotland, according to his readings. Took a PhD in physics in 1939. I, in the meantime, went to University of Princeton, bachelor's and master's degree, and so far as I can determine, again, from memories, took a PhD in physics from Harvard in 1939, both of us in the summer. It was arranged by our inimitable father, who had a great deal of influence with the Navy and apparently political clout in various sections and parts of the government. We do not understand how he got these connections. We don't know anything about them. There are no documents to show this. He himself served in the Navy in World War I, apparently as an ordinary recruit. Did a 20-year stint, retired. At what status, we don't know. Again, the retirement papers are missing, the separation papers. We do not know whether he got involved in intelligence or not, but it would appear that he did because of the subsequent events. He didn't work, from everything we know, from that point on. He had money from the family, and he became an ardent admirer of sailboats and decided to build his own. He built one, raced it, took some trophies, would sell it and build another. In between, he was traveling back and forth to Europe, and as had been previously mentioned, he became involved in the smuggling of German scientists, Jewish scientists, out of Nazi Germany into the U.S. This ceased in 1939 when the Cold War turned to a hot war. But he had connections. We don't know how they were obtained, where they went, but it was determined that the two of us would become part of this project. When we finished our education, we were invited to join and to enlist in the Navy. We were both given commissions, September 1939. And we then did about 3 months at Provincetown, Rhode Island Academy, the naval officers. In those days, they did the so-called 90-day wonder business. But we were already fairly well prepared. We didn't go through Annapolis or anything like this. And then we were sent to the project. We were there in 39 up until, for a period in 39, then through in 1940. At the time of the test in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, we were on board at the Princeton Institute of Advanced Studies, and we also had, at that time, offices in the Philadelphia Navy Yard, which again became rather important later. But we did a lot of shuttling back and forth as part of our job. And one of the reasons why we were chosen was that the Navy wanted two people to represent their interests and keep full tabs on what was going on in the tests and the development of the program, who were technically competent to report in detail what was going on and to report to the Navy in the appropriate reports which they required, exactly what was happening in our technical commentaries. And that's why the education. There was also another aspect of this involved, that aside from Tesla, who did not have a good formal education, he started out, but in 1979 his father died, and his first year in the university was terminated, and he had to go to work. Came to the U.S. in '84. He had enormous insight and an incredible intuitive insight, and solved his problems in that manner very competently. He had a perfect track record. But unlike he, Van Neumann had a PhD in math, and his mathematical background was in the turn of this century. And before he came to the United States, he met a number of other people. J. Robert Oppenheimer was in Germany at that time. He became important because at a later time Oppenheimer was involved with the atomic bomb project, but not with the invisibility program. Additionally, he met Dr. David, what was the mathematician's name? Hilbert, who was a genius of a mathematician. He developed all kinds of new math. He was essentially contemporary with Van Neumann, who was born in 1905. Hilbert was born about 1912. And he had a PhD in math, but he developed whole new systems of math, about 5 different varieties, the most important of which, and for which he was well known, was a so-called Hilbert space. And this was a new means of describing mathematically multiple realities, multiple space, which became very important to the project. Van Neumann met him about 1925, 27, in that period, and took a lot of Hilbert's work and ran with it. And Van Neumann, in turn, developed all kinds of new systems of mathematics of his own. He was also known as a real genius of a mathematician. He was considered probably the most outstanding mathematician of this century, though some people think he was better than Einstein. Of course, others don't agree. But he developed many systems of his own, which became important. There was another man who was also very important as a mathematician, of which there was virtually no traceability at this time. It's an American by the name of Levinson, Dr. Levinson, born 1912, died, as far as I can determine, 1976. He's published 3 books on very involved mathematics. I finally was able to hold in my hands 2 of those 3 books. I found them very recently at the Institute of Advanced Studies Library in Princeton. Never been able to find them anywhere else, but no history of Levinson himself. And he developed what was even more important, the so-called Levinson time equations. With that as a background, they were able then to go on and develop the whole system of the invisibility project as applied to a large hard object. Now, in 1940, as I said, the test was successful. The Navy then decided they would go full bore, finance the thing with unlimited funds, and classify the project, of course. And we were part of it. Well, in 1941, the project was going on, and of course Tesla had full-bore enthusiasm from the Navy, and they had full confidence from the President and everybody else to go ahead. While we were at sea, because they decided the 2 of us needed some sea duty, so we spent a year, 1941, at sea, in the USS Pennsylvania, as I remember, which toured the Pacific. It came back to Pearl Harbor for some repairs and dry docking in October of 41. We took some leave. We went to San Francisco. The 5th of December, we were about to board the plane back to Pearl when we were stopped by a captain who was just getting on the plane. He said, "Gentlemen, your orders are canceled. Come with me." So we met Vice Admiral Hal Bowen Sr., who was the then director of the Office of Naval Engineering, which was abolished in 46, but he was in charge of all of the research work for the Navy. And he told us, "Gentlemen, you may as well know, we will be at war with Japan within 48 to 72 hours. We expect to hit Pearl Harbor. You're not going back there. You're too valuable." So we're going to leave you in San Francisco until your tour is over, which is the home base for the Pennsylvania. You do office work. You can enjoy some leave times. You might as well enjoy it, because when you go back to the Institute, there'll be no leaves and there'll be nothing but hard work. So we did. January 42, we went back to the Institute and remained there through the whole series of tests and the whole project. In the meantime, Tesla was given a ship for his full-size tests with crew. And that happened to be a battleship, unknown. But in wartime, apparently, politics has a bit of pull, and the politics coming from the President of the United States, he could probably order the Secretary of the Navy to supply any kind of ship that Tesla wanted. So he got a battleship. The equipment was designed, of course, by Tesla with a lot of work and cooperation, and you might say also a lot of fighting between Tesla and Von Neumann. Tesla was director, Von Neumann was, I guess, assistant. They didn't agree on everything. Von Neumann had a great deal of respect for Tesla's ability, but they didn't agree about everything. Tesla was insisting, as the date approached for the tests on the battleship with personnel, that they were going to have a very severe problem with personnel. He said flatly, he says, you cannot employ the large amounts of power required to make a ship of this size invisible without having a very disastrous effect on the heads of the people, or the minds, or the bodies of the personnel involved, because you're talking megawatts of RF power, enormous amounts of power, and the coils, which in the early phases were like degaussing coils, were wrapped around the hull of the ship, but the later design was a set of 4 coils mounted on the deck of the ship, specially designed Tesla conical-shaped designs. And just interestingly enough, every transformer design ever built by Nikola Tesla was in conical, was not round core, it was conically shaped, tapering towards a point at the top. Well, he knew he had a problem, Tesla. He went to the Navy, asked for more time, they wouldn't give him more time. He says, you have a deadline. And he had already been advised, and here we have to backtrack a little bit into the history of Tesla. By his own statements to the press in 1900 in Colorado Springs, he said he was in contact with intelligences from off the planet Earth, very coolly received by his scientific colleagues. He made the same announcement to the press in 1923 at the time of the Mars approach, the close approach in 23, and he made another announcement after that. And according to 2 people I know personally who worked with Tesla in the period in the late 30s and the early 40s, he had a great deal of RF equipment in his New York labs. He had 2 of them, actually. His residence at the Hotel New Yorker and a receiving station there. And he also had lab offices and a lab operation in the top towers and the top floor of the Waldorf Astoria, and his transmitters were located there. At least one of these 2 people said he was in contact with somebody off-planet nearly every day. He says, I didn't understand the equipment. He says, I know he was. The inference here, and the data I have, is that he was in contact with the outside, and he was getting information which says, you've got a very serious problem. You've got to solve it, or you're going to lose people. They'll be dead. And so he went, based on this, to the Navy. The Navy would not give him additional time. He says, I know how to solve the problem, but he says, I need more time to design new equipment. The Navy says, there's a war on. You can just make it work. Don't change anything. Make it work. You got a deadline. So he took the only way out he knew. And that was to sabotage the project for the test which came up in March 42. So he just detuned the equipment, so when the switches were thrown, nothing worked. I mean, the transmitters lit, the tubes came alive, and power was consumed, but nothing worked. No field effects, no invisibility. So he says, well, gentlemen, I guess I goofed. It's time to leave. You have a very good man here who can take over the project. Dr. Von Neumann, I'm leaving. Bye. It's debatable whether he left or was fired, or whether they said, you were fired, and he said, you can't fire me, I quit. In any case, he left. And that was the end of Tesla insofar as that project was concerned.
What year was that?
That was 1942, March. Von Neumann took over, and he looked at everything. He said to the Navy, he says, I've got to make a study of this. It obviously failed. He says, I don't know what's wrong, but I'll find out. He says, I need time. The Navy couldn't say anything. He said, give him the time. So he went ahead. We were working with him at that time. We were back and forth between the Philadelphia Navy Yard office and, of course, the Institute. I don't know where we spent more time, probably the Institute. So Von Neumann made his own study of it and decided to change things around, and they still had the 2 generators that he proposed to use. In the meantime, he didn't have the battleship. It was a ship of the line that went back in service. It did not have a special crew. It had the regular crew. And they finally decided, he, of course, talking through us to the Navy brass, and we needed a special ship. It would be outfitted from the ground up. So it was decided to pick one that was going to come down the ways, and they decided on DE-173, which later was named the Eldridge. And about July, of 42, they were laying the keel, and it was designed, the design was modified so they could put in 2 huge generators. And the reason why they had to design the equipment to the ship was the fact that a destroyer escort is not a very large ship. It's about 1,500 tons, roughly equipped. The later figure said 1,900. Dry weight was agreement between both the Greek records and the American records of 1,240 tons dry. It's a rather small destroyer. It only had 2 gun turrets. So to fit 2 huge generators and the motor drive system and all the RF equipment and the 4 transmitters on this thing, it took a lot of design effort, actually, from the beginning to know where you're going to fit the stuff. You don't throw it on this ship in midstream after it's built. So October it came down the ways, and they wanted to dry dock, put equipment on board. And before they did this, they decided they needed a special test crew. Selected about 33 people, all volunteers, trained them up at Groton, Connecticut, from about September to December of 42, and they graduated, and the picture still exists at the graduation class. And who was the head of the class but our father? This picture there with the naval uniform and the cap and scrambled eggs and the whole bit. Still don't know how he got involved in this, but he could have transferred between the Navy and the Coast Guard, because there is a letter of citation still on the records, which Duncan has had, I believe, I don't know if you think he still has it, I've seen it, a letter of citation from the Coast Guard for assistance during the wartime period, meritorious assistance for during the war for the Coast Guard, etc., etc. And this was the Coast Guard Academy at Groton where this crew was trained. So they came back to Philadelphia, and the work continued. The equipment was outfitted, and they started after the ship was not seaworthy, but actually out of dry dock, sitting at the dockside of the Philadelphia Naval Yard. A long series of tests began, a lot of modification equipment. Along about March of 42, Van Neumann started to shake a little and became concerned that maybe there's a personnel problem. He started to agree with it because Duncan and myself were both pounding on him, saying, there's going to be a personal problem. You can't turn the switch on. You're going to possibly kill people. Tesla said so. Well, to mention of Tesla's name, he got very upset. He would fly into a rage, eventually got over it. But he agreed, yeah, maybe there is a problem. What do we do about it? He decided to put in the 3rd generator and modify the system, and at that point he still had time to do it. So he ordered and had installed a 3rd generator along about May of 43. And it never worked right. It wouldn't sync with the other 2. The other 2 generators, I might add, were driven off a single motor and a gearbox, right-angle gearbox drive with special electronics to synchronize the generators, because with a motor of about 750 horsepower and a gigantic gearbox is required, those gearboxes were sloppy. You could not mechanically synchronize the generators. They had to be an absolute electrical sync, so that was accomplished by other synchronizing means with special cabinets. And there's another man whom I know of who designed that equipment. And he's still alive, too. Anyway, the 3rd generator never worked right. Finally, it went out of control one day and zapped one of the individuals assigned to us as a technician, a Navy man, first-class specialist. He was laid out completely unconscious in a coma. They hauled him off to the hospital. He recovered 4 months later, was never part of the project. So when Neumann finally said, all right, that thing's no good, pull it out, back to the original design. On this went, finally had their sea trial for the ship about mid-June. July 1, they decided to go into the final series of tests and preparation. So about July 20th of 43, they decided, well, I guess it's ready, and make our tests. So they decided 22 July, got the whole crew together, selected about 12 individuals plus the 2 of us who were in the control room to operate all the equipment. There was another man who was a radio operator who is, I believe, still alive today. I've not been able to talk with him. So the fateful hour came. They ran the ship out into the harbor, stopped the engines. They did not drop anchor because they had to be floating free as it would be normally in service. and they could not ground the ship with the anchors. So it came to a stop. The orders came via radio, fire up and go through the procedures, in which we did. The ship became invisible optically as well as radar. And this lasted about 15, 20 minutes. They finally said, okay, shut it off. Bring the ship back to dock, to the dockside berth, which was done by the crew. They boarded it to inspect it, and they found out there were problems. There were a lot of people on that ship who were thoroughly disoriented, sick, nauseous, and otherwise not with it. No one was dead, no one was injured as such physically, but the mind effects were severe, both physiological and psychological. Navy said, okay, pull the crew off. What's wrong? Back to Dr. Van Neumann. He says, I don't know, got to find out. So he started looking into this, and he finally decided he needed more time to study it. He said to the Navy, he says, this is going to take more time to look at. And he says, you have a drop-dead deadline of the 12th of August, 1943, to get this experiment completed, otherwise forget it. And he says, that isn't enough time. He says, that's your deadline. Well, we heard that. Duncan, or particularly I went to we went up the line. We went to Hal Bowen and said, what's this all about? He says, that's the orders I was given. He says, where did they come from? He says, I don't know, but I'll find out. We went all the way up to the CNO, which didn't make sense because the Chief of Naval Operations normally doesn't concern himself with that kind of detail in the research program. He's concerned with the operation of the war. But of course, at the same time, there was the other project called the Atomic Bomb Project, Manhattan Project, as it was known, and which was vying with this, was the secret weapon for the war. So as things went on, there were night and day operations to get this equipment in order. Van Neumann made changes because the Navy finally decided they don't want optical invisibility, they don't want radar invisibility only. At that time, we didn't have inertial guidance systems. We didn't have low-range shore-arm worldwide. And, of course, if you didn't have radar to see where an adjacent ship was, you better be able to see it physically. Otherwise, in a fleet, you might ram each other at sea at night. So that was the orders. He modified the equipment. On the 12th of August, rather shaking as we went out into our station, we knew things were wrong. And, well, we followed orders. The orders were, at the appropriate time, turn on the equipment, which we did. For about 60 or 70 seconds, everything looked good. They got the radar invisibility. The ship outline could be seen hazily. It was still more or less visible. And then, as memory serves, and as the observers said later, there was a flash of light, blue flash, and the ship just disappeared. Wasn't seen anymore, no outline in the water, no hull, nothing. No radio communication, gone for about 3 hours. And it came back. When it came back, they knew immediately something was wrong because one of the masts, the principal radio mast, which had been designed by T. Townsend Brown, along with some of the transmitter equipment and modifications, was broken. There was some superstructure damage, and they couldn't get any radio communications, and they couldn't get the ship to maneuver, so they went out and boarded it, and that's when they found the real extent of the problem. There were 4 men embedded in the decks, 2 in the steel decks on top, 2 on the bulkhead walls, and the 5th man had his hand jammed in the steel of the wall. He lived because they could cut his hand off and give him an artificial hand. People disoriented. Reports were some were floating around and finally got their feet on the ground. Others floated away and disappeared. The crew on the second test was a little larger than the first. And a number who were just plain totally insane. So the Navy said, get that ship back in here, get the crew off. They held 4 days worth of meetings. What's wrong? What do we do now? And this, of course, involved all the top brass, plus Van Neumann, plus the scientists. They couldn't come to any real conclusions as to what was wrong or what to do. And eventually decided there would be one more test on the Eldridge, and there would be a dry run again like the original one. No personnel. Rebuilt the equipment. They would run it by remote cables, about 1,000 foot of cable from the adjacent ship.
No generators on the ship itself?
Everything on the ship as it was originally for the second test.
Okay.
But they would use the crew to take it out into the outer harbor at night and then remove the crew and control the equipment remotely. which they did in late October. And same results in essence, but no crew to be damaged. The ship disappeared for about 20 minutes, came back. A lot of equipment was missing, 2 transmitter cabinets, 1 generator. Everything in the control room was a burned out shambles, even though nobody was there. The 1 cabinet with the 0 time reference generator was still intact. The Navy at that point just said, that's it, and wipe our hands of it, stripped the ship, re-outfit it so it can go to sea, and of course it had already been christened and properly commissioned with its regular officer, which is of record, and sometime in the fall it was ready and went to sea, and the log, which was later recovered by the Greeks after the war was over, and the Eldridge, which had gone into mothballs in 1946 and was transferred to the Greek Navy in 51, the log had all of the pages missing prior to January 144. So the problem, and the question was, what really happened? What went wrong? Now this is where, at that time, we didn't know what was going on. But that is, after the first test, we didn't see anything wrong. After the second test, we knew what was going on. That is, he and I did, because what happened was very, very bizarre. The ship disappeared into hyperspace. And the important point was, there was another experiment going on at the same time, and that was the Phoenix Project, which 12 August 1983 was exactly 40 years to the day later. And what's important about this is the fact that it was a 40-year separation exactly, actually a multiple of 20 years. Work done since then, or perhaps during that period and ongoing, has shown that, like humans who have a biorhythm, the Earth has a biorhythm. And the Earth's biorhythms peak out, 4 of them, 20 years to the day, plus or minus maybe half a day, every 20 years on August 12th, 1943, 63, 83, 2003, whatever. And it just happened to peak, or shall we say, maybe it just happened, maybe it was arranged this way. The August test in 43, August 12th, coincided with the station running August 12th, 83, and provided an additional function, which provided the connecting link through the Earth's fields for the 2 experiments to lock up in hyperspace. The ship was pulled into hyperspace completely. And the only way it could be returned was we decided, he and I, we couldn't control the ship. We knew something was drastically wrong. We tried to shut the equipment off, and we could not. We tried pulling handles and everything. Nothing would yield. We just got half electrocuted. We finally decided, let's get out of here. Well, where do we go? We jump over the side and land in the bay, get away from this thing. Well, we jumped overboard, and we didn't land in the bay. We wound up through a time tunnel and wound up standing on dry ground at Montauk in 1983, August 12th at night. And of course, we were found very quickly. We were taken downstairs. Van Neumann greeted us. He knew you. Of course he knew us. He knew we were coming. The thing was a bit of a shock, because here we were just working with Van Neumann 43, who was a young man essentially, and here we see Van Neumann 83, an old man, who knew we were coming, knew what it was all about. I said, gentlemen, we have a problem. They said, we have a lockup through hyperspace. And I said, we knew this was going to happen because I've had the records. He said, I've lived with this 40 years waiting for this day, so to speak. He says, we can't shut this thing down because the Eldridge is the source of the power running this thing from the other end. It's in hyperspace. It says, you guys have to go back and shut the thing off. He says, we know you did. The records say so. Which, of course, you haven't done it yet, but you're going to have to go back and shut it off. So he says, shut it off any way you can. Destroy it physically if you have to, which is, of course, what we did. We went back to the Eldridge. They had, of course, the time capability to send us back directly to that spot and location, quite aside from the movie and what it said. We went back, we took out the axis, and we just started cutting cables right and left till the generators shut down and the equipment was off. We smashed tube banks, we smashed equipment, we cut cables, we cut everything in sight. Generators went down, the ship returned to its original point in space and time about 3 hours later. And of course, the Navy found what was there. I remained with the ship, he went back to 83. Begins another part of the story, but from that point on, 43 on, Van Neumann in 43 didn't know what had happened except what I told him. He didn't believe it. But he had equipment which enabled myself to go back and forth between 43 and 83. He had another set of equipment in the labs, which actually was the early equipment, which was the prototype. And he had modified it, which the Navy didn't know at that time, to be a full-blown time travel machine.
In 43?
In 43, correct. See, the Germans also were working on the time travel project, and they had it working in 45, just before the war ended in Germany. This is also a matter of record. So, in any case, trips were made back and forth. He was finally convinced. And it was too late to do anything about the experiment in the second phase. But after the Navy decided to shut the whole thing down, of course, he was removed from the project to go work on the atomic bomb project at Los Alamos until that was over. So in 47, getting a little out of sequence, but nevertheless we try to present this in a logical sequence rather than the exact time sequence. In 47, there was major changes in the Defense Department. You had the Department of the Air Force created. The Navy's function was somewhat altered. The Army was altered. The Department of Defense was set up, the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs, all of this. And somebody, after Hal Bowen was retired, in the new structure of the Navy with the Department or Office of Naval Research said, well, let's go back and find out what the blazes really happened with the Eldridge and this whole project. The war is over. We haven't got anything else to do. Let's see if we can find out what it was about and maybe salvage something out of this if it's possible. So they said to Van Neumann, go take another look at this thing. You've got all the time you want. There's no war on. Take your time. Be thorough. What happened? What went wrong? What do we do about it, if anything? So he says, all right. Now, I will take a look at it. Now, a number of things happened. I did not know about the UFO connection until fairly recently. But to go back to 43, about 6 days before the final test, which is to say early August, 3 UFOs appeared over the Eldridge. They were seen, they were noted. And when the final test began, 2 of them left the area, a third disappeared. One of the UFOs was sucked up along with the Eldridge into hyperspace, and it wound up in Montauk in the underground. Now, that's interesting because of what turns out in the records since, which come out of Canada. I'll go into that last. But Van Neumann, looking at this, realized there was a human equation he didn't understand. And he was not a metaphysician. He had no occult training. He was a hard-headed mathematician, typical German school type thing, and nuts and bolts engineer at the same time. And he probably was scratching his head. What the blazes was going on here? Well, about 47, when he was asked to look into this, shortly after that, he was also, because he still had offices probably in Los Alamos, he was called out by the government to partake in the examination of a crashed UFO at Aztec, New Mexico. He was part of the research team there, looking into this. So here he sees evidence of life from another planet, from another system perhaps, dead aliens and all of this sort of thing. What does this mean? Well, another one occurred approximately a year later, again at Aztec, and then there was another one at Roswell later. But the second one at Aztec that came down, the first one apparently had some of the little grays, as they've become to be known since, all dead. The second one that came down had at least one live occupant still in it.
Did they come down in the same place? Or
in New Mexico, in the same general area of Aztec, yes. The reason being that, from what we can learn now, is our radar systems were affecting their drives. And when it was found out that we could do it, apparently some of the people in the government started doing this deliberately. We're not sure that that's exactly what happened.
Did they both come down on that plateau in Aztec?
Yeah, they came down in the same general area. Apparently because of a radar system not too far away.
Right.
So the second one crashed, but it had a survivor on it. And apparently this one was not with the same group. And when Neumann got to talk with this one, and he told him all about his problem. Van Neumann's problem with the whole experiment. And he said, I'll give you some clues as to how you're going to have to solve it. He said, you're going to have to solve it. So how the communication was set up, I don't know. But Van Neumann got his clue from that. He was badly shaken. He learned enough that he had to go back and start from page 1 and learn his metaphysics, his occult theory, everything regarding the human psyche. And he was told this, apparently. And I'm speculating in part. But he learned that he had to go back and do his homework on metaphysics. When he did this, he found out what the real nature of the problem was. And the real nature of the problem is esoteric, but it's also very real. First of all, the ship, in order to partake of this experiment, in order to create these fields, you were actually doing a rotation of the space-time fields. And you can only do this if you have the equipment to generate these fields, and you can only generate them if you have a zero-time reference. None of the energies can be created and synchronized without a zero-time reference generator, and that was the first thing they had to have, and that was developed by Tesla in the 1920s. Now, the ship had a zero-time reference. The ship was locked to this thing with the fields because the fields surrounded the ship. So there's no problem. The ship was locked to this, and when the thing came down, the zero-time reference brought everything back to the same point. But humans also have a time reference. Now, they're not locked as to a zero-time reference. They're locked to the point of conception. Every individual who is conceived and then goes on through the gestation period and is born is locked to the time stream, as we call it, and is locked to it so that he can relate to the society and the civilization around him and flows at the same rate as everyone else and has a reference. That reference remains throughout his life until he or she dies, at which point the soul goes onward and it can come back and reincarnate either, theoretically, either past or future. But these time references are somewhat fragile. When you start pumping megawatts of power and actually pulse those into the gigawatt region of the type of energies which will affect the mind and the psyche and the spirit, you disrupt these references. So what happens? The references for the individuals were disrupted. They are still within the ship's field, so they are not lost. They don't float off into space at that point. But when the ship's fields come down, if those individuals' references are knocked loose, as everyone on deck was, and those below, behind the steel barriers, so to speak, which are shields against both the RF and magnetic energies, they were not affected, and we weren't because of that. And it's not an instantaneous effect either. Those who were floating in the decks lost the references, so when the ship came back to its normal space-time, the individuals didn't float back in the exact same reference. They could have been anywhere. If they happened to be in the space where the ship materialized a steel deck or a steel bulkhead, then the steel of that bulkhead was in their bodies as the body finally rematerialized. If they floated off into space, they floated off into space and didn't come back at all. So that was the problem which Van Neumann faced. How do you lock the time references for the individuals to the whole system, the ship's references? How precisely he solved that, I don't know, but he did know that he had to use a computer to synchronize the whole business. He had to find a means to lock the individuals in. This required some knowledge of metaphysics, and it also required a computer, which did not exist at that time. So we went and developed a computer in the labs at the Institute. The first modern electronic computer was developed by Van Neumann in 1950. And the first full working model was 52, and they developed a model. Apparently, they went to the Navy with a whole new system. In 53, they performed a test with another ship, name unknown, which was totally successful. And the individuals did not go wandering off into space. They didn't perish. They didn't get violent. They didn't become nauseous. Everything was normal the way they wanted it. So what happens? The Navy says, we finally got it. They canceled Project Rainbow, which was the name for the project from 1940 on, and it became Project Phoenix. So this became, in part, Project Phoenix P1, and it also went into P2. But this is where the Philadelphia experiment, Project Rainbow, became part of P1 and became parallel with certain other work going on at Brookhaven. Now, one of the problems, of course, that developed, and the thing that the Navy had to look at, was what happened to the personnel. There were a number of medical reports, and I know of these because I personally talked with George Hoover, who was part of the investigative team with the Office of Naval Research in the 50s, when the whole matter was reopened with Mark K. Jessup, who wrote the book, The Case for the UFO, and this famous annotated book arrived in, I think it was Admiral Firth's office in 1955, and circulated through the Navy Department, the Office of Naval Research. And Jessup was called on. I says, what do you know about this? He says, nothing. He says, what are all these footnotes? He says, I have no idea.
Was the Allende note?
This was the Allende business, right. Carlos Miguel Allende, and here's in the footnotes and the letters which later went to Jessup. And Hoover became thoroughly interested in the whole business. He set up the whole team to research the business, and he went back into the records. And he told me when I talked with him on the phone about 2 months or so ago, I found out where he was, and he's retired, and he says, he said, there was a medical report, and there was a final report. And he says the medical report was the most interesting one of all, because he said this indicated that the Navy was confronted with a totally new and unique situation, very high-powered equipment affecting the minds and the physiology of sailors and men, which they had never had any experience with before. And he says a lot came out of that. Well, a lot did, but he didn't talk about what came out of it. Out of that came work which led to the mind research programs later, and all of the other things which expanded from P1 on. And they also found that certain aspects of the whole Philadelphia experiment and restudy involved mind potentialities for mind control, certain other things which they noted where some of these people faded out of our reality and then would fade back in a totally involuntary manner. Very strange phenomena, but all of this became part of a larger research program later. So the thing was salvaged in that sense. It also went on and became the basis as expanded for the development into the stealth program and a lot of other programs which are very sensitive and we'll go into. But what happened to us? Well, in 47, the Navy decided they didn't want me around anymore, or somebody decided they didn't want me around anymore, and I suddenly disappeared one day, according to one Navy man who's still alive, who was in that period. And I wound up in 83. And in the interim, now this becomes very difficult to understand at this point. Here I was in 83, just sent there from 47. I was already there in 83 working on the Phoenix project because of another huge time loop. He was there working on the project in 83, and he was also there because of the Philadelphia experiment. So they had to take great pains to keep myself and myself apart, if you understand what I'm saying, and himself apart. Because of two people running through a time loop, the same person, absolutely, through a time loop, meet each other, it's a disaster. So they took a great deal of trouble to keep us apart. But in any case, they sent me to 83. They decided on how they're going to handle the project. They wanted to bury me and anyone else that had any connection with the Philadelphia experiment, totally brainwash the individuals, and wipe out all memory of the experiment and anything connected with it. So they did that to me, and in the meantime, they had also developed some other hardware, which was known as the age regression techniques. Now, this also goes back to Tesla. His last project before he died, if he died, in 43, was again communicating with his ET friends. They had told him how to solve the problem. He went on and developed a system for what he thought would resolve the problem of the sailors or anyone on board these ships after the experiment, if they had lost their time locks, to reestablish them in another point, possibly, where it would be more stable. The government took this and developed it into another program, which was known later as the age regression business, meaning physical age regression, i.e. you could take a person who was age 60 and reduce him by this technique and this program to physically age 20, put him back to where he was at the age 20 physically, but not mentally. He would maintain his abilities, his ideas, his thoughts, his memory, his entire lifetime of experience. Just the body would be reduced in age. The theory on this and how the government handled it, we don't know. But the theory that Tesla worked on, we understand, was that if you take these time locks for the individual and move them forward in time, you are in effect removing X number of years of age. If you push them ahead 20 years, the body will act eventually, because of the shift of the time references, like it is 20 years younger, and will physically reverse itself in age and go to the reference of those locks. So that it will, within about 30 to 60 days, we're not sure how long, the body will just get younger. So what they did with me is they decided, well, we'll do a new one on him. We'll take him from age 31, which I was at that time in 47. just run them back to the age 1 and plug them in another family, and they picked the year 1927. Apparently it was astrologically chosen, because I can go into a long story on this, but plugged me into the Bielek family. The kid who was born to them apparently developed some problems. Whether they were genuine or whether they were feigned, I don't know, but the story was the kid was very ill and went to the hospital and died, and I was put in as a substitute and fitted in terms of what's a 6 months or 1 year old kid? One kid at that age looks just about like another. If you select them properly, you can hardly tell the difference. The mother may know the difference. Mm-hmm. And as it turned out, in my case, my legal mother, before she died, about 4 months, she came up one day in the nursing home with a memory. She looked at me very blankly, like I was somebody else, came out with this, I will never forget, she said, "The baby's dead, isn't it?" And I knew then that she knew, and had buried for years a memory of what had happened, because a substitution was made and she knew it, but she chose to forget it. There was only one child in the family, and that was me. There were no brothers or sisters. So I had a good part of my answer. I also know that I can regress all the way back in the time age sequence to 6 months, and then there's a total blank. And then there was a means by which I seemed to remember being born, which was actually the other kid, and I was interlocked for years with the other kid's cross-coupling of the lattices, which was another very exotic technique they used. They wanted to make sure I wouldn't remember anything, and I would remember being born in that body, which I did, except I wasn't. Anyway, that was what they did to me. In the meantime, in the process of pursuing the Phoenix Project, which was myself in this, if you want to put it, this current run of the lifetime, plus his, his original body. There's a crossover point here. I have to go back. Yes, okay, in the original body and my original time and his original body, we were involved in running back and forth in the tunnels, and he became caught in a side tunnel, which wasn't supposed to exist, but did, and he disappeared in it. I had to go find out what happened, and he was trapped by some aliens. They wouldn't let him go, and they wouldn't let me go either. So finally I said, "What do you want?" He said, "We want a piece of equipment." I said, "Well, you aren't going to get it if one of us aren't let go and let loose to go get it." I said, "Where is it?" He says, "Back at Montauk." I said, "Where?" And I said, "In that ship which came in." "What is it?" And he described it and says, "I'll go get it if you'll let both of us go if we get the equipment." He says, "I went back, I got it." Is Preston?
Sure.
Okay. It was the charging device for the crystal, which was used as the drive for the ship. It was not understood at that time what it was, and they didn't want us in our society and civilization at that time to have it.
This is the original Tesla design?
No, this is the ET piece of equipment,
Oh.
ET equipment off the ship. They wanted that charging device back, so we didn't have it. It was agreed if I brought it back that they would release both of us. They got it, they released us. In the meantime, unbeknownst to them, his time locks dissolved because they didn't have a reference in the time stream. We were in a time zero artificial reality which they had created. So when he went back, no time references, his body starts to age very rapidly, like about a year per hour. So in 21 days, in spite of the best efforts, the original body died. It was arranged in the meantime. I go back and see the father, "Hey, get busy, make another son." That son was born in 1951 and 1963 at the exact node point between the 20-year sequence. He was a walk-in into that body at the age 12 from 83. Now, how all of this was accomplished in terms of technology and metaphysics, I can't answer because I don't know, but it was done. He has the memories, I have the memories. The research, which has been done by Preston, shows quite conclusively in terms of mathematics and otherwise that this all fits. So he now has the memories that come back, and of course he was chosen to be part of the Phoenix Project, the later run of it as he became involved. I was also chosen to become involved with it, and I was involved with it for years. Both of us were.
Which aliens held you in
And we don't know which group it was, but it was the friends of, as part of the same group of the ones who were trapped underground. they came out alive, all 7 of them. And we worked with them for a while. 3 of them decided to talk. Pruitt was very much concerned about an alien invasion, and apparently quite correctly so. And he gave me the assignment of getting these guys to talk, finding out what their language is, decoding it, learning what was in their manuals, and trying to figure out what made their ship stick. Well, this is a little bit out of time sequence in a way, but nevertheless, we don't know where it fits in terms of absolute time and not temporal time to this dream. But as I remember, 3 of them talked. We learned what we needed to. The other 4 didn't like it. They never talked. One of them was apparently the captain of the crew. They murdered the 3 that talked. Those 4 were then put in deep freeze. And there they remained until the station went down. All power was shut off eventually, and they probably deteriorated after that.
Now, were they captured like in 47 time or in 83 time?
83 time. They started in 43 and wound up in 83.
And they didn't get back like you did?
No, they did not get back. Though the others that we ran into on the side chute of this tunnel, we were told never go down the side chute. He said they don't exist theoretically, but we know they're there. They've had reports apparently of it. He said don't ever go down and go through the main tunnel. For some reason he got distracted on the side tunnel. Why, we don't know. It happened.
What did you learn from the aliens? You said you had to speak with them. Did you learn about their hieroglyphics, their language? Or
we learned about their language. We were able to decode their manuals, and the concern was this a vanguard of an invasion force?
And?
I'm not sure what really came out of that.
This was in 83.
This was in the, well, maybe it was 83, maybe it wasn't.
Right.
I don't know the exact point in temporal time because I've been involved in that project at so many points.
Right.
That when you're taken back to your point of origin, you're automatically erased, and you don't really know where that time was. I know that I believe the first time period I was involved with the Phoenix project was out of Hawaii in 56. They just pulled me forward into the time period where they were operating.
Can you read hieroglyphics? Their hieroglyphics, can you translate it? If you saw
it? No, I did then, but I can't do it now. Totally brainwashed since. When the project went down, we were all being brainwashing. Only in the last year have I started, a year and a half, have I started to come back with any of the memories of the the Philadelphia experiment. And only in the last 6 months have I started to come back with any of the real technical knowledge.
How have you come up with these memories? They just come to you, or has it been like through his machine? Or?
The memory process, well, it started basically in August of 85 when I came after the USB conference where I met Duncan and Preston. I had known Preston prior to this, that particular conference. But he invited me to come east sometime and see their lab and possibly become a part of the lab. And I said, great. So my job collapsed in the meantime. I said, okay, you want to come in up in August? And he says, fine. So I was there a few days. I was going to be there just a weekend. I wound up being there 10 or 12 days. And after about 3 or 4 days I was there, and Preston says, I want to show you 2 guys something. I'm going to take a trip out in the eastern part of the island. But what he did is he took us to Montauk. Now, I'd never been there prior to this, I thought. And he had not been there prior to this, he thought. And they took us out, and we were picking up and monitoring. And he was checking our monitoring of what we felt to see whether...
Monitoring with what?
The fields in the area. As we approached the town of Montauk, we were already feeling some pretty heavy crap. And as we got out to the area of the base, where we parked the vehicle, which was in the parking lot of the park, and then walked in the base, as we walked in, we started to feel, what the blazes is going on here? This is horrible. This is in the broad daylight. The further in we got, and the closer we got to the main radar building, the worse it got. Finally, we were both agreeing this is something absolutely horrible took place here. And I was seeing then, psychically, so to speak, the fact that there had been a 30-foot monster roaming around that place. And I told President, I said, I wouldn't want to be here at nighttime for any reason. And he said about the same. But that was my reintroduction, really.
Right.
That was the basis upon which, at a later time, I started to remember. There was a lot of meetings and discussions. Eventually, in 3 trips back, there was a famous May 86 trip, including other friends from Phoenix who had alerted about the project, and they came via various invites, probably from the senator, to go out there, got the permit, and wanted proof of something going on there, and got into a big fiasco. But eventually, that summer, I moved to Long Island, which was August of '86, and I got a job and stayed there until March of '87 when I went back to Phoenix. But in that interim period when I was there, was when I finally, well, actually earlier, it was in May of '86, or one of my last visits before I moved there. One weekend, I just decided not to take the plane trip back. He kept insisting I was there on the project, and I was one of the important cogs in the project. I said, not me, it must have been my double, because I've had a lot of problems for years with the double. He says, yes, you were there, and Preston sort of took a neutral position at that point. And I said, no, I wasn't. He said, yes, you were, and then finally one Saturday afternoon, I said, okay.
Duncan said you were there.
For the sake of argument, to myself, say, okay, I was there. Suppose I was. What then? For the next 2 hours, I shook like a damn leaf. I mean, I did the nervous shakes like you wouldn't believe. And when I saw that and felt that coming on, I said, oh, crap. This only means one thing. I was there. So I finally started mentally, internally, scanning up and down my timeline to see what could I find here. Is there a crack in this whole damn business of my timeline, of my time memories? I finally found the crack. It was a very narrow one. It came from Hawaii in '56, and that's a long story. How I nailed that down, but I did. Says, all right, what's there? Boom! Down the tunnel, and there I was in Pruitt's office. And I was talking with him, and he was talking with me. He finally decided, yeah, I was the person he was looking for, and the person he wanted on this thing, and so on. I said, oh, crap. I was part of this thing. And the strangest thing happened that night after Preston came back. I canceled my plane flight. I canceled the turn-in of my rental car. So about 7:30 in the evening, Preston gets a mysterious phone call. Is Mr. Bailey going to pick up his plane ticket for the flight this evening? I already had the ticket. It was already too late for the flight. It was already over. A little while later, another phone call. Is Mr. Bailey going to turn in his rental car? And I was too late to turn it in. Third phone call about something or other related to me. And then another phone call came from someone alleging to be Mr. William Van Weiss, who I knew very well, and Preston knew not too well, but he knew him. Speaking on the phone in a very drunken voice. You're Preston Nichols? Yes. I don't like you. I don't like you because you have stolen my work. You've done this and this and this and this and on like this in a very drunken tone of voice. He's saying to me, he says, Bill. I said, why? I said, this guy is talking like he's drunk out of his mind and blaming me for everything. And I said, we'll find out when he gets off the phone. So I immediately called up Bill, got him immediately in California. I said, Bill, did you just call Preston? He said, call Preston? He said, I haven't talked with him in months. And he was perfectly sober. And I knew he was sober because he'd gone on the wagon, on the water wagon. I said, why? And I told him why. He says, I didn't call. I said, I don't know what this is all about. This whole string of mysterious phone calls that night, which we have never been able to figure out where they came from. But it meant I'd hit the jackpot. And somebody was monitoring the fact that I had finally tumbled to the Phoenix project. Well, so far as the Philadelphia experiment is concerned, how I remember that is somewhat different. In 1984, the summer of '84, about August, EMI Thorne of England released a movie entitled The Philadelphia Experiment, which a lot of you may have heard of. And that showed at Sedona, Arizona for a week. I was in Sedona at the time. Friends went to it. They didn't invite me. And I went and was going to go see it, but I never made it. 2 weeks later, it was totally missing from the American scenario. It was gone. Well, the story, which turns out much later, was that 3 days prior to its release, EMI Thorne in England got a letter from the U.S. government saying, we don't want this movie shown in the U.S. We just don't want it shown. Period. EMI Thorne said, well, what do we do? I said, well, let's play dead like we never got the letter. We already have our commitment dates for release in the U.S. We'll just go ahead and release it, which we did. Got another letter from the U.S. government. We don't want this movie shown, period. 3MI Thorne couldn't ignore the second communication, so they fired back, and if you want it stopped, he said, you're going to have to get a federal court order banning it. And he says, we will. And they did. Banned for 2 years. Now, in 86, they got a counter injunction by releasing the first one, and it was shown from that point on, from 86 on, as a tape.
Can that be proven? Because I mean, if there was a federal court order, it should be a record.
It should be, but we haven't pursued it. And this is the information which basically Preston turned up because he became involved in this thing for another reason.
That's very unusual for a science fiction movie.
Yeah, for a science fiction movie, right. Well, in any case, came December of 87. About 4 a.m. one morning, I was watching HBO. I just happened to tune in on the tail end of a movie which they had shown, and they said, well, for our next feature tonight, we will show the Philadelphia Experiment. My ears went up like this, and I said, oops, I'm staying up to watch this thing, because I had not seen it and wanted to see it. So it went on from 4 until about 6 or sometime with commercial breaks and all of that. When they first turned this thing on and started going through the initial sequences and the two main characters in the movie, I looked at this thing and I was turned inside out. I said, what the shit is this all about? What does this mean to me? At that point, no memories. After 4 viewings of this video, it started to come back. It had literally had to hit me over the head 4 times before the memories finally started to come through. And at that point, he hadn't even seen the movie or the video. March of 88, there was a music festival in Lexington, Kentucky, called EKU Music Festival, Eastern Kentucky University. We all went down to it. And I brought the video with me. I bought it in the meantime. And I said to Preston and Duncan, I said, let's get a video player, because they had TV equipment in the motel rooms. I asked Duncan, you ever seen it? No. I said, would you like to see it? Yeah. So we rented a video player. I showed it to him. He went absolutely inside out when he saw this thing, particularly one sequence in the end.
He tried to crawl into the light outlet.
Literally, threw furniture around, crawled under the little table between the 2 beds.
Preston?
Yes, Preston. When he gets disturbed, it becomes physically very violent. I mean, he can smash furniture. Now, he didn't literally try to smash furniture. He got thrown, tossed. He tried to crawl on the light outlet, and I said, Duncan, it's over. He says, come on out of here. And I says, well, so I guess one could learn to live like this. And he crawled out from underneath, and we tried to figure out what was this all about. Well, every time he's seen the movie since, he's turned inside out, though a little less each time. The last time I showed it was quite recently, during the period of my trip here, and he was getting quite upset even during the showing of the same sequence, which is near the end of it. And it has a very, very powerful impact for him. It does for me, too.
What is Duncan's original birthday?
His original birthday?
Yeah.
15 May 1917.
Okay. And then,
1917?
Yeah.
1917. And your original birthday?
4 August 1916.
At that time, what was the relationship between the 2 of you?
Brothers, half-brothers.
Okay.
Because we're the same father but different mothers. And the same relationship has continued because I'm still basically in my original body, though he's not, but he was reborn into a body by the same father. It was actually the last child that father had.
What incredible lives you guys have had.
It's incredible, I know. I've tried to prove it. Now, I'll go into this a little further. I've tried to prove my records and backgrounds of education, where I was and so forth. Nothing. I can find nothing. I spent a lot of time at Princeton. And I can find absolutely nothing except when I go through the yearbooks for 36, 37, 38, there are faces in there I recognize quite strongly. I've not attempted so far to contact any of these people because most of them are from the East Coast.
But your face is not in that group of pictures?
No, I'm not in there at all. No trace of me.
And you should be?
Yes.
But in the class picture, they can't take out a picture if it's a class picture.
Oh, sure they can.
Oh, yeah, they can alter it.
Sure.
Now, I could be, this is another thing, in the total class picture of the graduates, It's very difficult because of the size of the classes
what I
and the
mean.
way they take the picture to pick out an individual
Right.
face.
That's what
No,
I'm
but the
referring to.
Soviets
It'd be very difficult to pick out an individual face out of that total class picture unless you had the original print. The way they reproduce it in the yearbooks, they're good quality, but they're not the best. Only the people up front usually are clearly discernible. And the classes were quite large then. But I could find no trace. I could find no records. I tried going through to see if they could find a thesis under my name. Nothing. Well, what was it in? Was it in engineering? Was it in physics? Well, it would be in the engineering department under the professor who sponsored you. And I said, who the blazes was that? And I haven't gone up to the Harvard end yet, but I'm sure I'd run into the same brick wall up there, though I remembered exactly the names of the professors I used to understudy in the lectures with Soudern and Sauberg. And according to Preston, they were still there 11 years ago. And this is remembering from 38, 39.
Does Duncan remember this?
No, he went to University of Edinburgh. Though I do remember he came down when my father was sick once. He came down, flew back to the States, and stayed about a week, and I invited him to come into one of those classes just to see these two profs who were so outstanding in their teaching of physics at that time. They had enormous classes. I mean, these were lecture hall type things, but they had enormous following, an enormous number of people, because he taught physics in a very interesting and very understandable way, even though they were going in the deep end of the stuff for their PhD. They had an enormous amount of interest and enormous following, and they were very, very popular teachers right up to the point where they retired.
And both of you served in the Navy and were brought in by your father.
That's right. Father's dead.
Into the Philadelphia experiment. You then moved forward in time to 83.
Right.
And then you went back.
We both went back. I stayed back. He went back to 83.
He returned back to 83. So,
but then there were some trips I can't chart too well, backward and forward. And there's in one of those trips which were involved as connected from the original Philadelphia experiment, though he was back up in 83, there was a side trip. It was connected with that UFO business that came through with us, in which we got trapped and he lost his time locks and he died.
But did you live through the 50s and 60s and so on, or you skipped that time?
Oh yeah, I did. I lived through that.
But Duncan didn't. Right?
He was reborn in 51.
I see, yeah.
Duncan doesn't remember rock and roll music. I actually remember the introduction before, 62 or 63, I forget which.
Rock and roll was introduced around the early 60s, wasn't it?
No, I'm talking about he doesn't remember songs that go back before 63. Now, I have all that stuff in my CD collection. Hey, you remember this? No, I don't remember. I've heard it later.
So when
But
you were
if you go
reborn in
63 and
51,
on,
then you lived a normal life on, went through school and stuff like that?
well, when he was put in 63, the memories he had before 63 are very, very sketchy.
Right.
You know, the memories from the original entity, whoever, whatever that original entity was. He doesn't have much today. He'll tell you he has essentially sketches, bits and pieces of it.
But 63 on, then you relived a normal life or whatever, went through high school and whatever?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Right.
But then you wound up in Montauk?
He was recruited for that later, yeah.
So you were
How long were you at
twice
Montauk?
almost.
Do you know how many years?
He started about 74.
Until 84?
83.
83.
The other thing
It
that
was early 70s.
puzzles me a great deal is like the circumstances of the script and the production of the movie, because obviously
Right.
all of it is true except for the romance part.
Yes.
So where did they get that from?
So
Where
how-
did these English people
How
get
could they
this
get that
story?
close?
When none of us knew
Do you
about
want
it.
to say anything on that, or do you want to leave that sit?
We'll leave that sit.
Okay.
Oh God, they're gonna teach us again.
We can speculate on how they got the information.
What,
They somehow acquired it.
I was familiar with the movie, and I remember John, when we saw it
Well,
together,
let's
and it
say
lasted
this
some
about
weeks.
it. Let's say this about it. How many people here know who Aleister Crowley was?
Oh, of course. Of course.
All right. How
English.
many people believe Aleister Crowley could pull stuff from the future? Okay, let's also, now,
Maybe.
Aleister Crowley would have needed a very strong witness.
He drew the first break.
So they said.
He would need a very strong witness in the future to pull this. Now, let's discuss a prior life that I have had. I was born in 1820-something into a family known as the Wilsons. I was Preston Wilson. Guess who my brother was? Marcus Wilson. And guess who is Marcus Wilson today?
Do you remember?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Now, guess
things never
what
change,
company the Wilson brothers owned in Britain and Scotland? Thorn Industries. That's Thorn EMI. Guess who was also very heavily tied into the Thorn-Wilson connection? Aleister Crowley.
Who is Aleister Crowley? I don't know.
Oh, he was a dark magician, a very dark magician.
He was a black magician
Very
by
black.
some people's descriptions. He was questionable, but he was into magic. The Labor 666, the book called Magick, and this whole business. He was infamous in England in the turn of the century.
Yeah.
Now, I know this because the historian for Thorn EMI came and asked me, do I have any idea why the name Preston B. Nichols is in the Thorn archives? And the only thing we've been able to conclude is that somehow they must have made it in A.D. Cameron was in the archives also. Somehow, Crowley, we think, through his abilities, made connections to he and I in the present and got the whole Philadelphia experiment story and recorded it. He may also know the whole Phoenix Project story, too. Who knows?
There's no record of all of that, him being connected to all of this stuff.
Say again?
He died in
Not unless
47.
in Nehemiah's archives.
Is it in their archives that there's any connection between him and them? Is there anything written about that?
No, but if you look in Aleister Crowley's book, you'll see references to Preston and Marcus Wilson and a scientific instrument company, which of course was Thorn Industries.
And what did you do in those days as that type of person? What were you?
Scientific instruments.
Yeah.
We were the owners of the company, he and I.
And I told you that
we inherited from our father.
That in lifetimes past that you had to have extraordinary knowledge, that you would learn this on your own. You had to. That's just so clear.
So the movie was British completely,
Yeah.
except for the actors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was filmed? Well, it doesn't matter.
Filmed in the U.S.
I didn't
basically.
realize it was a British movie.
Well, it was essentially filmed here. I mean, it was filmed here. It was backed by the British. Because, first of all, the U.S. government wouldn't let any American company even start it. They sort of snuck it in under the nose of the government.
I'd like to just ask a quick question. You know, with regard to these people that were dragged into this Phoenix program or whatever construct, I've had certain stories that have come up as far as ufology goes, which may be related, of people seemingly getting into trouble and the government coming along and just getting them automatically out of trouble as if they meant something to the government, although no one knew what that was. Do you have any knowledge of that?
No,
I mean, would
correct.
Oh, okay. In other words, if one of these young people, right, who had participated in this really got some serious trouble later,
They could get them out.
Yeah.
you think they would?
Sure, they can get anybody out of trouble they want.
In order to maybe protect some
Look,
people.
with the way the CIA and NSA can erase all records of individuals, the CIA and NSA could get anybody they want out of any problem they get themselves into, even the highest crime in the land, murdering somebody. They could cover it up entirely. Nothing else, they could grab everybody involved and do the memory erase number.
Just to change it around a bit, the CIA, NSA, all those people of power, they must be able to go into the future the way you guys did or can.
Yep.
And they must see that soon there's going to be extraordinary changes on this planet, and I wonder how they handle it. I wonder if these guys think that they could change time for themselves.
They believe they can.
They think they can, yes.